Chapter 31 Buying a New Starship. For the first time in 8 months, the first armada of the Imperial Navy had gotten some much-needed reprieve from their daily lives of combat. What remained of the armada was quickly relived by two others who, once on the front lines, allowed Erich and his unit to return to Imperial space where they were to undergo repair, rearmament, and resupply. After arriving back in Imperial space, Erich felt as if an enormous weight had been lifted off his chest. He had served well over 5,000 hours in combat, and by now, he felt as if his blood had been permanently ignited by the adrenaline which seemed to never leave his system. If there was one thing that was capable of bringing his nerves back into proper order, it would be alcohol. In fact, he felt a burning desire to have a drink, no, not just one drink, but a dozen, maybe two. However, such quantity of alcohol was illegal for consumption, and the only way to get his hands on it would be through the black market, which had been driven deep underground due to the intense nature of Germanic law enforcement agencies. If Erich wanted to truly relax in what limited time he had, then he would have to visit one of these black market space stations, which existed hidden away from the public eye, primarily in asteroid fields. Of course, Erich did not even possess his own starship, and thus he had no way of actually traveling to one of these locations. However, after 8 months of active service as lieutenant in the Navy, as well as the credits he had accrued via winning the virtual reality starfighter tournament, which now seemed like a lifetime ago, Erich could easily afford his own starship. However, despite the Empire having a vast military-industrial complex, which even offered civilian equipment, he hadn't the slightest idea what ship to purchase. At the moment, Erich was sitting on an industrial world, whose primary purpose was manufacturing and repair. In the orbit of this world was a large tech ring, which acted as a massive shipyard. This was where the first armada was currently undergoing repair. As for the crew who served upon its vessels, they were given free rein to return to their families for the remainder of their leave. But Erich did not have a family, at least not any longer, thus he spent a considerable amount of time wandering the planet's primary city. The world of Quarry had a primarily savanna climate, which was mostly destroyed by the many factories which littered its surface. Yet, the heat that accompanied such an environment did not dissipate. In fact, it had only been intensified by the heavy industry which was active at all hours of the day. Thus, Erich found himself sweating quite profusely as he made his way to the local starport, where he would be able to purchase a starship for himself. After stepping foot in the facility, Erich's face was blasted by a cool atmosphere which was generated by the building's life support system, and as a result was able to take a deep breath and sigh in relief now that he was out of the blazing light of the star. After approaching a kiosk which had access to the inventory of ships which were available to purchase throughout the entire star system, Erich was approached by a young woman who was dressed in an employee uniform. She took one look at the solid black jumpsuit, which Erich wore, and exclaimed in shock, before introducing herself. "Oh, my! Are you perhaps a member of the legendary Black Sun Squadron? My name is Anna Paulson, and I would be happy to assist you in finding the perfect starship for your personal use." Erich looked around, believing that perhaps the woman was speaking to someone else. Maybe another member of his unit. After all, he had never seen a store clerk treat him with anything but suspicion before, due to his so-called genetic defects. When he realized that the woman was speaking to him, he pointed at himself and asked for clarification on the matter, just to be sure he was not imagining things. "Me? Are you talking to me?" The woman looked at him with confusion in her deep blue eyes, before wearing a pretty smile and nodding her head. "Of course, you are the only one here wearing the uniform of the Black Sunday. You are a pilot in that legendary squadron, are you not?" Erich smiled as he shook his head in disbelief. Never before in his life would he believe that a random stranger would treat him with the same politeness they did everyone else, and thus he was quick to voice this shock, even if he did not mean to do so. "I can't believe it." The woman tilted her head with a confused expression on her face before asking for clarification about just what Erich was talking about. "You can't believe what, sir?" Looking around at the shop, and all the astonished gazes that people were giving him, only added to the confusion that Erich currently felt. Thus, he shook his head once more and sighed, before finally answering the woman's question. "It's nothing. Yes, I am a member of the Black Sun, Lieutenant Erich Jaeger. It is a pleasure to meet you, miss, and I would be honored if you could assist me in finding a good starship for my personal use, especially since I am not entirely sure what I am looking for. I could use a professional's opinion." The woman smiled once more and giggled slightly as she made a remark about Erich's status in comparison to her own. "You are going to make me blush. If you are not a qualified professional, then what could I possibly be? But I would be happy to assist you. Is there anything in particular you are looking for?" Erich thought deeply on this question for several moments. There were many requirements were a must in a personal starship, and he did not know if there was actually a model that meets his needs. But simply gave caution to the wind and voiced what he desired most outright. I would prefer that my starship have the ability to traverse across the empire with relative ease, and perhaps even beyond imperial space, if I ever get the clearance to do so. Thus, a large fuel supply is mandatory. It should also be capable of being operated by one man if needed, but no more than 5 men in total. I will need proper living quarters for each crew member, along with a mess hall and a functional restroom. I would prefer if the ship had a decent-sized cargo bay, but not so much that it diminishes its combat capabilities. The vessel would need at least size 3 gimbal-mounted weapons, with missiles of a similar size. As for the shield generators, it would be ideal if they were large. Discover NW Chapt RSNN0EL by .com. While Erich was speaking to the woman about his requirements, he saw that her eyes lit up with a data stream, signaling that she had connected herself to the grid, most likely in search of a ship which met most, if not all, of his requirements. After several moments of searching, a wide smile lit up her face, before she placed her hands together and jumped a little in excitement. You will be happy to know that I have several starships that meet your requirements. All of these models are marketed as expeditionary craft, but if you are really looking for more offensive capabilities, then I suggest the Hydra interplanetary privateer. I would just be careful when dealing with the authorities while piloting such a vessel, because Hydra's line of ships have a reputation for being used most commonly by pirates. And though piracy has all but been eliminated within our borders, many of our more, shall I say, unruly citizens have begun operating beyond imperial space, committing a number of heinous crimes with ships like the privateer. After saying this, the sales representative transferred the information on the privateer, as well as the other offerings to Erich via the grid, to which he began to closely scrutinize each and every vessel. In the end he could only sigh, and nod his head in agreement with the woman's opinion. The privateer was exactly what he needed in a starship. There was just one problem: he could not afford the 3 million credit price tag. With a heavy sigh, Erich bowed his head before admitting defeat. I'm sorry, that is just out of my price range. The woman looked slightly taken aback. She knew how much money officers made in the military, and if this man was a special forces pilot, then his yearly salary was no less than 150,000 credits. Assuming he was soon retiring, and had been in service for 20 years, then he should definitely have the money for the ship. It suddenly dawned on her that this man might actually be the age he appeared to be, and with an astonished look on her face she asked Erich a question which he was not anticipating. Excuse me, sir, if you don't mind answering my question, just how old are you? Erich chuckled as he heard this, before informing the woman of his age, which only further increased the shock she felt. I have just turned 21 this year. Why do you ask? In the Germanic Star-Empire, people aged very slowly, largely due to their genetic enhancements. There were men and women well over 100 years old who looked as if they were in their 20s. Anna herself was actually 75 this year. She never would have guessed that this man, who should by all means should still be at the military academy, was actually so young, and a lieutenant no less. However, in the next moment, her lips curved into a sly smile as she whispered something in Erich's ears that he never thought he would hear from a woman as respectable as this sales representative. You know, if you are short on credits, I know a way that you can quickly make some fat cash. Erich had a bad feeling about what the woman had just said. The only way to make 3 million credits before he was forced to redeploy was through criminal means, and he did not want to end up on the wrong end of the law if he could avoid it at all. However, Anna continued to whisper sweet poison into Erich's ear, and he continued to listen. Naturally, as someone who sells a lot of Hydra's products, I have come into contact with some unsavory individuals. It just so happens that I know of a crew which is looking for an experienced pilot to help them with a little task. I won't lie to you. It is incredibly dangerous, and will certainly result in a harsh sentence if anyone were to find out, but you could easily make 3 million or more from a day's worth of work. Are you perhaps interested? Despite every single instinct in Erich's body telling him to decline the offer, he did not dare do so. For him, who had always skirted the line of what was considered legal and a serious offense, it was too tempting to make that kind of money in such a short amount of time. While he could wait and save his money for 2 decades before buying such a ship, Erich was not exactly the most patient man in the world, and he had no idea how he was going to spend the next 3 months of leave if it were not drowning himself in alcohol. The level of stress he had endured these past few months was enough to give any man a serious mental condition. With adrenaline and endorphins flooding through his veins as if a dam had broken, his mind never stopped thinking about the things he had seen and done during his brief tenure as a combat pilot. If he was going to get the rest he needed to continue his job, then he would need to get his hands on some illicit substances, and if he was going to do that, then he would need a starship of his own. Thus, he bit the proverbial bullet and nodded his head in silence after several moments of contemplation. Seeing that Erich had accepted her offer, Anna transferred some coordinates to him via the grid, before giving him some proper advice. These men aren't looking for anything more than a skilled pilot, so do your job, and you will get paid your share. However, I would recommend that you wear a flight suit and helmet that is less conspicuous. Luckily, I can sell you just what you need. After you get changed, meet my contact at those coordinates and he will tell you everything you need to know about the job. Good luck, and I hope to see you soon. It took Erich several moments to realize that he had just sent himself on a path that could very well lead to a lifetime of service in a Panel battalion. And if there were ever a time to turn back, it would be now. Still, he did not do so. Instead he did as Anna suggested and purchased a less flashy flight suit and helmet, one with a visor that was tinted so that his facial features were not revealed. He then took a shuttle to another point in the city, where a small bar was tucked away between several larger buildings. Here, he would begin his first foray into the criminal underworld. Chapter 32 Entering the Criminal Underworld. Erich stepped foot into the bar and quickly found himself practically all alone. There were only 2 men other than himself inside the run-down establishment. One was the bartender, and the other was a sinister-looking man, who was quite burly and riddled in what were clearly battle scars. After sitting down at the table, the burly man took a quick glance at Erich before posing a simple question to him. "Are you the new guy? The one that Anna recommended?" Erich silently nodded his head in affirmation of the man's question, to which the burly man then raised 2 fingers, thus ordering 2 shots of whiskey for himself and his new partner before introducing himself. "The name is Drake. I heard from the girl that you are quite the experienced pilot. Is that true?" Erich once more silently nodded his head, confirming that he was indeed an experienced pilot. Shortly thereafter the bartender handed them their drinks, to which Erich and Drake took their shots in an act of solidarity. Afterwards, the bartender pressed a button beneath the counter which locked the doors and windows of the bar, while also changing the sign outside from open to closed. Once this was finished, Drake began to speak of the job while the bartender fetched them a few more drinks. Find new stories on novelbin.com. Alright, here are the details of the job. There is a facility on an abandoned moon, just outside the Empire's borders. It sits between the Empire and the Oni's borders. This facility, well, you could say that it produces a certain product. Don't ask me what it is. You don't need to know that information. Just know that it is in high demand and will sell for a premium within the Empire's borders. Your job is to get us to the site and to get us out of there, alive and with the cargo intact. You do that, and you will get an even share of the profits. You ever fly a heavy freighter before? Though Erich had not actually flown a freighter before, he was experienced enough with much faster craft, so much so that he was confident he could fulfill the task at hand, and thus he nodded his head in silence once more. Which put a smile on Drake's face, who took another shot, and after wiping his mouth of the alcoholic beverage, he clapped Erich on the back. "Alright, from here on out, I'm going to refer to you as Apex. I don't need to know your real name, just like you don't need to know mine. Do the job, and get paid, that's all there is to it. Just one last thing. We are expecting fierce competition, so I hope you know how to dogfight." Erich took another shot and nodded his head once more, which put an even wider smile on Drake's face. Afterwards, the 2 men stood up, where Drake exited the facility with Erich in tow. The dynamic duo then took a train to the starport, where they regrouped with the rest of the crew. If there was such a thing as overtly being a criminal, then these men met the standard. Much to Erich's surprise, many of these men were mutants like himself, thus they did not bat an eye at his unique appearance, and instead welcomed him into their band of misfits. Erich took one look at the freighter, and could tell he would be able to fly it quite easily. It was not a giant spaceship by any means, at least not as large as many of the other heavy freighters he had seen. But it did have a long neck, with multiple compartments to store cargo or, in this case, contraband. After entering the pilot's seat and powering on the vehicle, Erich was able to effectively pilot the ship out of the starport and into orbit, where he activated the quantum drives before heading towards the coordinates that Drake had given him. The journey to the destination took quite some time. It was not a mere day's worth of work like Anna had claimed. In fact, just to reach the edge of the Empire's borders it had taken them several stops for refueling, along with nearly 2 weeks of travel. During this time, Erich got to know only the briefest information about the crew, such as the pseudonyms they went by. Most of the time was spent playing cards in the mess hall of the ship. It was only after 2 weeks had passed that the ship came out of quantum and, in doing so, revealed a large blue gas giant and a small moon just beside it. It was exactly as Drake had claimed. However, the sensors clearly indicated they were not alone, and thus Erich sent a command to the rest of the crew to prepare for combat. "Heads up, we are not alone out here. I'd recommend getting into the turrets, because we are about to make contact with some hostiles." The crew quickly got themselves in order, as they entered the multiple turrets on board the ship, while preparing for combat. Erich boldly drove the ship towards the other vessels, where he immediately locked onto the smallest of the 3 ships, which appeared to be a light freighter. Without even bothering to say hello, he began to open fire as he darted around the three ships with some difficulty. After all, this was not a light fighter, nor was it an interceptor, or even a bomber. This was a freighter, and it moved just like one would expect it to. Still, Erich managed to maintain a sight picture on the hostile vessels, and when combined with the multiple turrets on board the ship, he was able to lay down some serious firepower, even if the hostiles were more maneuverable than he was. After firing his weapons for nearly a minute, the light freighter, which Erich had targeted, ignited, expelling its cargo into space. As for Erich, he quickly transitioned his targeting array to a second target, which was a larger ship. Knowing that he would not be able to take it out as easily with just the laser repeaters, he switched to missiles, where he quickly fired 3 of them off in succession. Due to the nature of his current actions, Erich was naturally aware that now was not the best time to reveal his special abilities, some of which were exceptionally rare, and thus, he did not use his cyberkinesis to bypass the enemy's countermeasures. Instead, he switched back to his laser repeaters and continued to fire at the enemy to the best of his abilities. His shields had taken some damage, but it was nothing he couldn't handle, and thus, after another brief dogfight, the second hostile ship exploded. With only one ship remaining, Erich had just managed to shift his sights onto it, before the cowards jumped into space, leaving behind their fallen comrades and their expelled cargo. Much to his surprise, Drake shouted over the comms in a voice that was filled with excitement. "Goddamn Apex, that was some mighty fine flying. Hold us here, and we will use the tractor beams to collect the enemy's cargo." Erich did as commanded and waited for his crew to stack the containers of contraband neatly on top of one another within one of the many cargo bays that existed on this heavy freighter. After they had finished, they shut the doors, allowing Erich to continue down to the planet, where more enemies undoubtedly lied in wait for them. After touching down on the surface of the moon, Drake entered the cockpit, where he gave Erich a fair warning regarding what was about to go down. "All right, keep the engines running, and wait until I give you the signal to take off. Trust me, this is just the beginning. But you don't need to worry about us. We are skilled enough to take care of these fucking dregs." With this said, Drake and his crew departed from the freighter and headed towards the facility with their weapons in hand. Though Erich heard an exchange of gunshots, it was not long before Drake and his comrades came back to the freighter, where they carried several containers worth of contraband with their personal tractor beams. Erich waited patiently for some time as the crew filled up the entire ship with the contraband. It was only after there was no space left to carry the contraband that Drake came into the cockpit and gave some more advice to Erich. "All right, you are going to take us to this space station in Imperial space, where we will sell our haul. I'm sure I don't need to inform you of this, but stay clear of the authorities. If we get caught with what we are carrying, it is a life sentence in a panel battalion for all of us. You understand?" Erich silently nodded his head and began to take off after charting the new coordinates into the freighter's nav computer. His heart was beating more so than he had ever experienced. Even after over 5,000 hours of active combat, Erich did not ever feel as anxious as he did now. The journey back to their destination was perhaps the longest and most dreadful thing Erich had ever experienced, but, thanks to his knowledge of Imperial patrol routes, as well as the fact that most of the Empire's forces were currently engaged in the war abroad, Erich managed to make his way to the space station in question, where the freighter gently landed upon the platform. After which, the crew began to unload the cargo, where they then sold it to a criminal syndicate, who would distribute the illicit substance across the Empire. Once they had successfully earned their pay, the crew met in the mess hall of the ship, where Drake distributed the profits. Erich's eyes nearly jumped out of their sockets when he saw the number of credits transferred to his account. 5 million credits. He had more than enough to afford the starship he wanted. Hell, he could easily spend the remaining cash on some proper gear for himself and upgrades to his ship. Just when he was about to ask how much the crew had made in total, Drake smiled as he grabbed hold of Erich's shoulder before explaining just what they had sacrificed for him to get such a massive payday. "There is a bit of a bonus thrown in for you, Apex. We had some time to talk while we were in the facility, and we had to admit, if it was any other pilot we could have hired, our gooses would have been cooked the moment we came across such a large number of hostiles. Not only that, but even I have no idea how you managed to so expertly avoid the authorities. The entire journey back, even when we were refueling, there was not a single Imperial warship anywhere near us. Thus, after a unanimous decision, we decided to sacrifice a bit of our pay to give you a bonus for your hard work. You more than earned it. I don't know who you are, but you are more than welcome to come back and pilot for us whenever we get our next job. Enjoy your fortune, Apex, because it sure disappears quickly. From here we go our separate ways. After a job like this, we are going to attract some unnecessary attention, and it would be best if we made ourselves scarce for a little. You can take a shuttle from the station back to Quadi, where I am sure our mutual friend is waiting for you. See you around the stars, kid." After saying this, the crew did exactly as Drake had said, and split up. Soon enough Erich was back in the industrial world of Quadi, where he met up with the sales representative Anna Paulsen, who had an exciting smile on her pretty face as she welcomed Erich back to the store which she worked in. "You're back. I suppose this means the job went well? So tell me, are you still interested in the Hydra privateer?" Erich smiled as he nodded his head and in doing so accepted the offer that Anna had previously given him. "Good. I will get the transaction ready for you in just a moment." After saying this, Anna leaned in close and whispered something to Erich, yet again. "Oh, and by the way, now that you are a part of our world, Hydra has a special offer for you. For only an additional 500,000 credits, they will give you lifetime insurance. For whatever reason, if you manage to misplace your ship, or it becomes damaged beyond repair, they will give you a new one, no questions asked, and free of charge." Sounds great, doesn't it? It was only now, after hearing this exclusive offer, that Erich realized the arms corporation known as Hydra Interplanetary, which specialized in starships and other vehicles for the civilian market, was actually heavily entrenched in the criminal underworld. Even then, he would not dare report such a thing to authorities, or else he would have to explain how he found out about this information. Thus, Erich smiled and nodded his head before accepting Anna's generous offer. "Sounds good to me." With this said, Anna began to file the necessary paperwork. However, much to Erich's surprise, the information that would be sent to the Department of Transportation was under a pseudonym with other false information. Before he could question Anna if she had made a mistake, the attractive woman made a slight wink to him, silently conveying that this was Hydra's way of looking out for their exclusive clientele. Erich graciously accepted this offer, and was informed by Anna where he could get the proper identification documents attached to the name and address, which he immediately did after acquiring his ship. Thus, after a brief and dangerous mission, Erich had not only gotten his hands on his own personal starship, but had also gotten his first contacts into the criminal underworld, which he could use when he was not deployed to engage in any number of lucrative, but illegal, activities. Chapter 33: Visiting an Outlaw Outpost. It did not take long for Erich to get his hands on his personal starship. The Hydra privateer was a medium-sized vessel, which was capable of housing 4 crew members. It had a remote turret usable by the co-pilot, and 2-man turrets on the left and right sides. Aside from that, it had asymmetrical wings, which when landing were folded into the vertical position. The paint scheme that Erich had selected was jet black, with some red accents. Not only that, but the windows were tinted a blood red, giving off a menacing appearance. After stepping foot inside the starship, Erich realized that it was a very minimalistic and utilitarian design. However, unlike the warships he stepped foot upon, it was not the least bit polished, and was entirely rough around the edges, with exposed wires, components, and insulation across the vessel. The reason for this design choice was because Hydra Interplanetary primarily sold ships to those rogue elements who lived on the fringes of imperial space, or even outside it. Thus, they had elected a bare-bones approach to ensure that self-maintenance was as efficient as possible. Ultimately, Erich had no complaints, as this starship was more than capable of fulfilling the tasks he required of it. Thus, after hailing the starport and requesting permission to take off, Erich had ignited the engines and slowly took off vertically with the VTOL thrusters. For a ship of this size, it took quite a bit of time to reach orbit, but Erich was more than used to such things, and thus once he was in space he spooled up the quantum drive and marked his destination in his nav computer. The area of space which Erich was headed to was on the fringes of imperial space, located within an asteroid belt within an uninhabited system on the borders of the Empire. Having used his new underworld contacts, Erich was able to locate the nearest outlaw outpost to his current location, which was embedded in a particularly large asteroid. The journey to the asteroid outpost took almost as long as the journey to the contraband facility that he had flown to during his previous underworld mission. After nearly 2 weeks of flying in space while alone in his ship, Erich finally arrived at the star system which housed his destination. Just like he was informed by Anna, this star system was completely devoid of habitable worlds. Its star was a blue supergiant, while the only worlds within the system were a series of large gas giants that were used to extract and refine fuel for quantum drives. In fact, other than the outlaw outpost which was hidden in the asteroid belt, there was only a single space station, a star fortress, and a comm relay which the Germanic Star-Empire used in every system they owned. The space station, which orbited one of the larger gas giants, was used as an outpost for civilian miners who extracted the gas from the planets. But Erich had no intentions of stopping there and instead piloted his ship towards his destination, which lay deep within the treacherous asteroid belt. Erich did not know how many asteroids were in this system, but it ranged anywhere from millions to billions, and, if not for the influence of Hydra Interplanetary, which was given exclusive mining rights of this star system, then it was likely that the resources hidden among this asteroid belt would have been mined by large corporations long ago. Instead, Hydra's influence over the system allowed for the outlaw outpost to remain undisturbed by prying eyes. No doubt the mega corporation had bribed either the system governor or the sector governor for this purpose. Either way, Erich did not care and instead navigated his way through the asteroid belt before finding his destination. Judging by the fact that his vehicle registration was unfamiliar to the syndicate which ran the outpost, a group of large railguns which were embedded in the primary asteroid, and those surrounding it, immediately targeted Erich's ship, before hailing him. Identify yourself. If you do not, we will open fire on you. Erich did not hesitate to give the name that Drake and his crew knew him by, as well as the identity of the woman who had vouched for him. My name is Apex, Anna Paulson sent me. The station was quick to respond, as they tried to verify whether or not Erich's words were true. They did not bother asking for his real identity, simply because so many outlaws chose to operate with pseudonyms for the sake of anonymity. Hold while we verify your credentials. Alright, you are clear to land in Hangar 09. After saying this, the railguns which were previously targeting Erich's ship disengaged, while the entrance to Hangar 09 slowly began to open. Erich skillfully maneuvered his new craft towards the entrance, which was just large enough to house his ship. If he slipped up by a few meters, his wings, which were now folded upright, would have clipped with the entrance. Upon landing in the facility, Erich did not take off his helmet which obscured his facial features, instead he boldly walked into the facility as if he was just another outlaw seeking a refuge. He could immediately tell upon taking the elevator to the lobby that this was indeed an outlaw's refuge. Nearly everyone in the facility was dressed in armor, and were carrying weapons that were clearly equipped with illegal modifications. Though the Empire permitted civilians to own weapons and armor, both on their person and on their ship, they did not sell things like power armor, plasma-based infantry weapons, or handheld railguns to the public. Thus, the weapons and armor in the hands of the more veteran outlaws were essentially makeshift exoskeletons, power armor, and railguns modified from more simple platforms. For Erich to show up in nothing but a flight suit, it was a clear indicator that he was just starting out in the criminal world. Which many people took notice of, yet nobody bothered approaching the newbie, or harassing him, as there was a certain honor among thieves, so to speak. After aimlessly making his way through the facility, while following the signs, Erich found himself in a small bazaar, where outlaws from all walks of life hawked their goods. Everything from drugs, bootleg alcohol, illegal weapons, etc., it could all be found here. Erich carefully observed each shop and was enticed by many of the offerings that were available. After seeing some weapons and armor that he thought were a much-needed asset in his new secondary profession, Erich decided that he would come back to those shops after he had made his primary purchase. If he had enough credits left over, then he would outfit himself with the best gear he could buy and stash it away in his ship's armory. In fact, Erich just realized now that he did not even possess his own house, and the only place he would be able to store this illegal booze was in his starship, which had a decent-sized cargo bay. Perhaps it was best that for the time being he lived a nomadic life among the stars, as the ownership of property came with many taxes and responsibilities to the state. Erich approached the bootlegger who was selling the alcohol and was quick to interact with the man. While he spoke, Erich's voice was concealed by a feature of his helmet, which was common practice among those who dabbled in the criminal underworld. How much for a pallet of your strongest liquor? The hawker looked at Erich with a curious gaze, pondering whether or not his newest customer was an experienced drinker or a complete novice. He quickly pointed towards a liquid which was glowing white before describing what it was. If potency is what you are looking for, then look no further. This is Rylonian ale. Don't let the name confuse you. This stuff is brewed with a certain flower from the Rylonian homeworld, which has a powerful psychedelic effect on the Germanic mind. I warn you, one shot of this stuff will put you on your ass for hours on end. Normally I would charge 35,000 creds for a full pallet of 500-750 milliliters bottles, but in case you have been living under a rock for these past few years, Rylonia has been completely wiped out by the narco. Which means these bottles are the last that I will ever be able to get my hands on. Right now I'm charging a premium for just one bottle, and there is no way I am willing to sell a whole pallet to one customer, no matter how much you are willing to pay. So, I would suggest if you are looking for quantity instead of quality, but are still looking for a drink that packs a punch, then might I suggest Asuran Palm Wine? It lacks the psychedelic effect of Rylonian ale, but even the most experienced drinkers can barely drink 2 fingers worth of this stuff without passing out. In my honest opinion, it is definitely the best bang for your buck, if that's what you are looking for. Although Erich wanted to try out the Rylonian ale, which had now become a delicacy throughout the galaxy, he could not afford the price that the bootlegger was asking for just one bottle of the stuff. Thus, he was quick to inquire about the Asuran Palm Wine. How much for a pallet of the wine? The man instantly raised 2 fingers, which Erich correctly assumed meant 20k, and just when he was about to accept the offer, the hawker began to speak once more. 20,000 creds, and it's yours. I can even have it hauled into your cargo bay free of charge. I would normally charge a full 25k for a pallet, but seeing as you are a new customer, and from what I can tell, are definitely suffering from shell shock, I'll give you a first-time discount. Erich raised his brows, which were concealed by his helmet's tinted visor after hearing the man's last remark. Shell shock. He did not believe he was suffering from such a condition, and was quick to ask why the man assumed he had been. What do you mean? Why do you think I have shell shock? Explore tote stories at noelbin.cm. The bootlegger did not hold back his punches and quickly fired back at Erich about why he was so certain the man was suffering from such a horrific condition. It takes one to know one. I'm guessing you just got out of your mandatory military service. In that case, trust me, you are not alone. Nobody buys a pallet of this stuff unless they are either trying to drink their trauma away, or are trying to sell it for a higher price, and judging by the fact that you don't know shit about alcohol, I can assume you are going for the former. Since I know what you are going through, I figured I would cut you a break. I've heard from my contacts in the Navy that the Admiralty is working the current crop of soldiers to the bone in this war with the Dvrakians. I don't know why they have chosen to go with such methods, but I'd be willing to put my money on the idea that your last deployment was in this ongoing conflict, am I right? Erich was left speechless by this man's deduction abilities. He had not even said a word about himself, and already this bootlegger was able to determine so much about him. He was hesitant to respond, but for whatever reason, he sighed before admitting to it. 1st Armourer, 13th Fleet. Though Erich could not see behind the man's skull-shaped helmet, he could tell by the way the man moved upon hearing Erich's confession that he was truly staggered by this statement. Which was confirmed the next second when Erich heard a long suction of hair before the hawker finally spoke. Shit. You were in the 1st Armourer? From what I have been told, you guys have been tossed into the meat grinder. Damn kid, have a bottle of Rylonian ale on me. You deserve it after what you have been through. Me personally, I served in the Ligurian War as a Star Marine. Though those lithoid bastards had far more advanced tech than the Dvrakians, they did not put up nearly as much resistance. After all, that was a simple proxy war waged between the Dominion and the Federation. Neither of us were fighting for our survival like the Dvrakians currently are. Still, I have no idea why the Admiralty is pushing our troops so hard in this current war. It doesn't make sense to fight so desperately against an enemy that we can easily defeat in a matter of years without sacrificing 1/10th of the manpower and resources we have already lost so far. Still, the fact that we are fighting in such a reckless manner is a bad omen. In fact, after I have sold the rest of my wares here, I'm going to take an extended vacation to the Great Oni Empire. After all, their women are both beautiful and quite fond of Germanic men. Not only that, but the Oni worlds are far away from whatever threat is making the Admiralty behave so impulsively. I recommend you do the same when you have concluded whatever business is keeping you here in the Empire. Good luck, kid, and enjoy the wine. After saying this, the bootlegger handed Erich a bottle of Rylonian ale, where he immediately got into a cargo lift which carried the pallet of Asuran palm wine into Erich's cargo bay. Once Erich had concluded his business with the alcohol merchant, he doubled back to the weapons and armor stands where he purchased some makeshift power armor and illegally modified railguns. He then took off and headed back to the industrial world of Quadi, where the 1st Armourer was still undergoing repairs. Chapter 34 Taking Hostages. During the 2 weeks that it took Erich to return to the industrial world of Quadi, he had experienced the best sleep that he had been able to obtain in nearly a year. Thanks to the intense effects of the Asuran palm wine, Erich had managed to sleep in his rather rudimentary cot within the captain's quarters of his ship as if he were a fat drunken baby. By the time he arrived in the atmosphere of Quadi, Erich felt fully rested for the first time since the Dvrakia war had begun. And though the effects of shell shock still lingered in his mind, Erich was able to perform his duties to the extent he was required. Officially, he still had 2 months left of his ongoing leave of absence from the Navy, and thus, he found himself debating on how he should spend his free time. After a day of nothing but drinking, Erich came up with 2 ideas. One was to unlawfully flee from the Empire's borders and enter Oni space for a brief vacation. However, after calculating just how much time it would take to visit the Great Oni Empire and return to Imperial space, he quickly dismissed this idea. Instead, Erich decided on pulling off another job for whatever underworld faction was willing to pay him the most. After searching through his new underworld contacts, Erich found a syndicate known by the name of Splinter that was looking for a pilot to transfer some contraband from Imperial space to an interstellar civilization that was classified as a minor power which lies somewhere between the Empire's border and that of Oni space. The job required his ship to have a certain cargo capacity, which his privateer was more than capable of meeting, and was paying 500k for a simple delivery job. And while he would have to avoid the authorities from both civilizations, Erich was confident that he could manage just that. Thus, after calculating the distance between himself and his destination, as well as the time it would take to get there and back, Erich realized that he would have enough time to make the journey, and spend 3 days' worth of vacation on one of the alien worlds. Which after doing some research, he learned that the home world of the alien species was a tropical paradise. With this in mind, Erich accessed the underground network, under the alias of Apex, and accepted the job. where he would have to head to a nearby space station which was on the way to his final destination and covertly pick up the contraband before smuggling it into the borders of the neighboring civilization. It took only a few hours for Erich to land at the space station, where he immediately headed to the bar of the facility, which was the destination he was supposed to meet his contact at. After sitting down at the bar and ordering himself a liter of beer, which was his legal limit for the day, Erich waited patiently for his contact to arrive. Contrary to what he was expecting, the person who sat down next to him and began to speak to him was not a burly or battle-hardened man like the outlaws he had experienced so far, but was a beautiful mutant woman with a particularly busty figure, cobalt hair, and scarlet eyes. Despite having a scar across her right eye, this only added to her attractiveness. The words she spoke were slightly hushed, but not obviously so, as she began giving Erich his instructions. "I'm assuming you're Apex." Erich was about to nod his head when she interrupted him. "Don't move a muscle, and don't you dare look at me. As we speak, your cargo bay is being filled with the product. Don't ask what it is, as it is not your job to know. All you need to do is to transport the cargo to Vaxkovia, where your contact will be waiting for you at the following coordinates. Your contact will take the cargo from your ship and will transfer the balance to our account, where we will pay you the agreed amount. Enjoy your trip. Oh, and whatever you do, don't sleep with the Vaxkovian women. I don't know what kind of weird shit you may or may not be into, I'm not one to judge, but if for whatever reason you are attracted to amphibian humanoids, trust me when I say that your dick will melt off if you try to fuck one of those things. And before you ask, no, the syndicate will not pay for your medical fees if you are so daring. So unless you want to waste your paycheck, I suggest you follow my advice." After saying this, the woman chugged a liter's worth of beer in a matter of seconds before exiting the facility. Once Erich had finished his own drink, he entered his starship to find that his cargo bay was filled with what he could only assume was drugs. Erich climbed into the pilot's seat and started up his engines, before requesting permission from the space station to take off, which once gaining approval, he then activated his quantum drive, before following the route that his nav computer had set for him. It would take Erich a little under a month to reach his destination, as well as make his return to Quadi. He would only have 3 days of relaxation on the Vaxkovian homeworld before he had to head back to the Empire. Thus, he planned to enjoy some time on the sandy beaches before he was once more forced to pilot a starfighter into battle. The journey to Vaxkovia was quite dull. He was all alone in the 55m long ship that was the Hydra Privateer, and thus all he could really do was entertain himself with the Asuran palm wine that he had transferred from his cargo bay and into the mess hall of his ship, while watching the latest news about the ongoing war with the Dvarakia consortium. With each passing day, the Germanic armed forces gained more ground against the enemy, and it was beginning to appear that the war might even be over by the time Erich returned to active service. If that was the case, then he honestly did not know how long it would be before he was able to see combat again, which was something that filled his heart with hope. Eventually nearly a month had passed, and Erich had landed on the tropical paradise that was Vaxkovia. The world was 90% ocean, and because of this, the amphibian species which inhabited it lived primarily in underwater cities. However, for the sake of interstellar trade, they had built cities on what little land their homeworld had, as well as space stations in orbit. It was abundantly clear by the level of technology that Erich saw aboard the Vaxkovian vessels that they were perhaps even inferior to the Dvrakians when it came to military technology. Which was not a surprise, as the Vaxkovian collective just barely qualified as a minor power with only 100 star systems and habited worlds under their control. Erich used the universal translator on board his ship to request permission to land within the planet's primary starport, which, once approved, he managed to do so with relative ease. However, despite the fact that things had been relatively smooth sailing up until this point, his luck appeared to have run out. Waiting in the hangar bay for Erich was a group of customs security officers who appeared to be heavily armed, as if tipped off about potential criminal activity. Upon seeing this on his ship's security system, Erich quickly ran throughout his ship's interior and entered the armory, where he found the equipment he had purchased at the Outlaws' outpost well over a month ago. Since he did not have time to equip his makeshift power armor, or the desire to go out guns blazing into the hangar bay of an interstellar spaceport, Erich had quickly grabbed hold of a revolver which had been illegally modified into a railgun, one which was affectionately nicknamed the hand cannon by those who wielded it. The railgun revolver had a 1x reflex sight mounted on the top rail, with a weapon light and visible laser combination device on the bottom rail. All in all, it was a solid option to carry with you when you needed to be less overt. After ensuring that the weapon was loaded, Erich stashed it on the back of his belt before approaching the cargo bay, which was now being surrounded by the Vaxkovian security officers. After opening up the ramp, Erich walked into the open with his hands raised, before using the universal translator in his helmet to speak with the officers who were pointing their ballistic weapons at him. "Whoa there. Everyone just calm down. I don't know why you guys have decided to show up to this hangar fully armed, but I can assure you that I have received permission by your customs department to bring my cargo into your world. The amphibian humanoids looked almost like a mixture of human beings and frogs as they continued to aim their sights upon Erich. The officer in charge stepped forward and reached out his hand before speaking in his native language, which was translated to Erich via his helmet's functions. Passenger and cargo manifest. Upon hearing this, Erich reached into a nearby container at the aft of the cargo bay which contained the falsified documents that the Germanic syndicate known as Splinter had forged for him. The Vaxcovian security agent who was in charge scanned the digital manifest with his eyepiece before handing it back to Erich. Just when Erich thought he had gotten away scot-free, the agent in charge made a shocking demand of Erich, which immediately put him on high alert. "I have orders to check your cargo for any contraband. Move aside and allow my agents to fulfill their job. If you try to prevent us from doing so, I will have you charged with obstruction of justice." Erich sighed heavily. He knew for a fact that he was carrying some serious contraband, one which commanded such a high price that the syndicate which had hired him was willing to pay him 500,000 credits just to deliver it. Knowing that he would be facing criminal charges here in an alien civilization, as well as of all charges when he finally got back to the Empire, Erich backed away from the ramp and leaned his back against the wall, seemingly allowing the security officers to check his cargo. While the officers began to break open his crates, Erich silently placed his hand on the grip of his railgun revolver and cocked the hammer back. The audible clicks went entirely unnoticed by the officers who were too busy investigating his cargo for contraband. At the same time, Erich had managed to quite easily slice into the starport's primitive security system, where he put the camera feed on a loop, ensuring that nobody would come looking for him after what he was about to do. Within seconds, the amphibian humanoids had found the drugs which Erich was smuggling into their territory. However, before they could officially react, Erich walked forward and reached his arm around the commanding agent's neck while pointing his railgun revolver to his head, where he immediately voiced his demands while the other officers pointed their ballistic weapons at him. "Toss your weapons aside and your eyepieces. Now walk away slowly. If I see even a single attempt on your part to call for reinforcements, I am blowing this bastard's brains all over my ship." Just like that. Nice and slow, nobody needs to get hurt here. The security officers did as they were instructed and tossed their weapons away, while backing out of Erich's ship slowly. They then got on their knees, waiting for Erich to hand over his hostage. As for Erich, his heart was beating more rapidly than when he had done that job for Drake and his crew. As anxious as he was also high with adrenaline, as he used his nanites to connect to the Vaxcovian Interstellar network, where he called his contact, and in doing so, alerted the local syndicate about his ongoing situation. "Yeah, I'm here, Hangar 3 at the starport. You might want to do some investigating into your organization, because someone ratted me out to customs." Erich's contact immediately responded with several questions. "Are you alright? Have they seized the cargo?" Naturally, Erich began informing his contact of everything that went down, and after a brief summarization, silence prevailed for some time before the contact finally spoke. "Alright, I understand. My team is on the way. In the meantime, you must maintain control over the situation, and whatever you do, don't let those bastards call for reinforcements. When I find out who ratted you out to the authorities, I will skin them alive. I will also contact Splinter and have them investigate their own organization in case the fucking rat came from their end. Stay tight." With this said, the call was immediately cut, and Erich transitioned his full focus to the customs security team which he was now holding hostage in the middle of an alien starport. There was only one way to describe the situation that he now found himself in. Erich was truly and utterly boned. New chapters will be fully updated at novelbin.com. Chapter 35, Returning to Active Service. Erich took a deep breath as he aimed his railgun revolver towards his hostages. Naturally, his finger was off the trigger, as he was thoroughly trained in the use of firearms during his tenure in the Germanic Youth Corps, and later during his time at the Naval Academy. The last thing he needed was to cause a negligent discharge and alert the entire spaceport to his hostage crisis. The 5 customs security officers remained kneeling on the ground with their arms behind their head as they eyed the security cameras, as if waiting for the starport's crisis team to respond. When Erich noticed this, he chuckled before informing the 5 men that their hopes were in vain. "I hate to break it to you guys, but reinforcements are not arriving. It was quite easy for me to slice into your security network and put those cameras on repeat. As far as anyone knows, you are still investigating my starship." Upon hearing this grave news, the hearts of the hostages nearly imploded. When they were tipped off about a potential drug smuggling ring, they did not expect things to end so poorly. They could only sigh and lament their lot in life as they waited for their fate to unfold. Shortly thereafter, Erich could hear the elevator functioning, and though the Vaxcovians appeared hopeful that their saviors had arrived, the moment the doors opened they were filled with even further despair, as a group of fellow Vaxcovians appeared on the scene. However, they were not dressed in security uniforms, but rather civilian clothes, with masks concealing their features. When they rushed into the hangar, these thugs drew their pistols which were concealed in their jackets, where they then approached the ship, while the leader of the unit spoke with Erich directly in the Germanic language. The Glymex gang thanks you for your efforts. Do not fret, now that we have the cargo, the payment is already being transferred to Splinter as we speak. You did good, not many smugglers could handle a sudden search and seizure this well. We'll take it from here. Erich sighed in relief as he lowered his railgun revolver and placed it in its holster after decocking its hammer. All the anxiety he felt prior to this moment suddenly disappeared, and instead a wide smile formed on his handsome face, though it was obscured by the tinted visor that his helmet made use of. Just when he was about to express his gratitude, the gangster in charge attached a suppressor to his pistol, before shooting the leader of the Vaxkovian security agents, point blank in the head. Erich had not expected that the gang who he was smuggling drugs to would outright execute his hostages, and he was quick to scream out at them in disbelief. What the fuck are you doing? The gangster simply snorted in disdain as the rest of the Vaxkovian security officers ran for their lives. However, they did not make it far, as the gangsters ceased their actions and aimed their handguns at the hostages' backs before pulling the triggers, and thus sending all the remaining hostages straight to the afterlife. After doing so, he responded to Erich's question with a cold tone in his voice. No witnesses. Erich could not believe his eyes. The murders had happened so quickly that he had not been able to intervene. Instead he fell to his knees, knowing that he was responsible for the deaths of 5 innocent security officers who were just doing their job. When he entered the criminal underworld, Erich had justified the murders that Drake and his crew committed, because they were Germanic citizens, and criminals no less, who were well within the range of cloning facilities. Those men had revived, and were most likely currently facing prison stints for the list of charges they were no doubt wanted for. But clearly the Vaxkovians did not have the technology to bring their dead back to life, and thus, the 5 men who were murdered just now were well and truly dead. Killing in war was one thing, after all, it was a fight for Erich's survival. It was him, or the enemy, but to witness the outright murder of several security officers happen in front of him, which was undoubtedly his own fault. Erich felt a part of him die inside and realized immediately that he was not cut out for the cutthroat business of drug smuggling. The lead gangster could sense Erich's despair, and thus he pointed his pistol towards Erich's head, before asking one simple question. One which undoubtedly would determine whether Erich would live or die. Are we going to have a problem? Realizing that he might die without the chance of resurrection in a cloning facility due to the distance between him and the Empire's network, Erich quickly shook his head, before climbing to his feet while finding his resolve to stomach this heinous crime that was undoubtedly a result of his own actions. After seeing that Erich was being cooperative, the gangster chuckled before stashing away his pistol. He then ordered his crew to put the bodies in Erich's cargo bay once all the contraband had been successfully transferred into their hands, where he gave one last bit of advice to Erich, who was struggling to keep his shit together. When you enter FTL, you should dump those bodies out of your cargo hold. Trust me, nobody will ever find them that way. Oh, and one last thing, I don't believe I need to remind you that we were never here. After saying this, the Glymex gang departed with the drugs, which they would no doubt distribute across Vaxkovian space. As for Erich, he climbed into his ship and took off with lifeless eyes. It took everything he had to properly dispose of the bodies which lie in his cargo bay without having a mental breakdown. No longer feeling up for a vacation on the beach, Erich immediately began to head back to the industrial world of Quadi, where he spent as much time as possible cleaning off the bloodstains from his cargo hold. Another month passed, and before Erich knew it, he was already back in Imperial space. The memories of what he had done on Vaxkovia had never left his mind. Only the mass quantity of Asuran palm wine which he kept in his ship could help him tolerate the guilt that ate away at his stomach. When he finally pulled into Quadi's orbit, he spoke to himself in a depressed voice. All test novel on novel bin. CM. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Despite the internal conflict that he was currently suffering from, Erich knew that he needed to put on his game face, or else when he re-entered active duty within the next 3 days, his fellow pilots would realize that something had happened, and he would undoubtedly be investigated. Thus, Erich forced himself to appear stoic, knowing that his freedom depended on it. The next 3 days were difficult to get through, as Erich primarily stayed within the confines of his starship, drinking wine to cope with the many disturbing emotions he felt at this moment. In the end, he stashed his ship away for long-term storage, before heading back to the carrier which he served on. It had only been 4 months since he was last fighting in Thrakia space, and yet, he felt as if a lifetime had passed. His brief foray into the criminal underworld, while exciting at first, had ended with a bloody mess. Something which even now he endured a tremendous amount of guilt over. Meanwhile, the war against the Thrakia consortium was quickly approaching its end. Something which Erich was immediately reminded of when he met up with his unit. Commander Erwin Wolf, who was in charge of the squadron, gazed upon the pilots of the Black Sun and smiled before welcoming them back to service. It is good to see all of us together again. Now, as many of you already know, the war is rapidly nearing its end, and all that is left is to lay siege to the Dvarakia homeworld, thus we will immediately be deploying to the front lines to lead the charge against the enemy. Silber, you'll be glad to know that your interceptor has been replaced, though I would feel remiss if I did not remind you to take it easy on the steams, and that goes for the rest of you adrenaline junkies as well, understood? Erich, along with the other pilots who had crashed as a result of overdosing on stimulants, immediately saluted their wing commander and responded in the affirmative. Yes, sir. With this said, Commander Wolf smiled once more before giving out his orders to his unit. Alright, well, now I want you fuckers ready for combat at a moment's notice. You all received a minimum of 4 months as leave, and the last thing I need is for you to get complacent. So, over the next few weeks, as we approach the front lines, I want you guys running combat drills on the regular. That's all for now. Dismissed. Erich followed the rest of his fellow pilots back to the bunks, where he stashed away his gear. Undoubtedly there would be another illegal card game tonight, but by now Erich had received his fill of unlawful activity, and decided to just get as much rest as possible before he was once more thrust into combat. In another sector of Imperial space, the cobalt-haired woman who was Erich's contact within the criminal syndicate most commonly known by the name of Splinter, was standing before a man, who was dressed in a full set of power armor, but this was not the kind of power armor that had been illegally modified from more conventional sets of body armor like the one Erich owned. No, this was a genuine suit of Star Marine armor that had been scavenged from a raid against Imperial security forces. Despite the fact that this was a genuine set of power armor, it was cosmetically modified with the skull and bones of a large bovine-like creature that was found on a multitude of alien worlds outside of Imperial space. The creature had a particularly violent and dangerous reputation, and its remains were prized among hunters from multiple interstellar civilizations. Not only was the armor decorated with bones, but it was also painted in a rather haphazard pattern whose markings almost appeared random in design. The cobalt-haired woman's scarlet eyes glowed, as a data stream reflected from her irises. In this data stream was the naval profile of a certain man, one who had recently conducted a job for her criminal organization. With a cold and collected voice, the woman read the information from the data stream aloud. Lieutenant Erich, Silber, Jaeger, recently assigned to the legendary Black Sun Squadron, where for the past year he has been performing combat duties as the spearhead of the GSC's invasion of the Dvarakia Consortium. The man has been awarded the Iron Cross First Class for his actions during the Battle of Thericles at the onset of the campaign, but despite his astonishing record of kills as an ace pilot, it appears that his career in the Imperial Navy has been stifled by the Admiral in charge of the 13th Fleet, who is quite angry with Erich for the controversy he caused when he assaulted a female reporter. It doesn't help that several months later he crash-landed on the hangar bay of his carrier after overdosing on stimulants, and in doing so caused some minor damage to the ship. A voice which had been modified by a modulator spoke in a way that resembled that of a robot, as the man in the power armor quickly raised his hand and halted his subordinate's report. Mirage. I don't give a damn about his military service. In case you haven't forgotten, literally every man in the Empire is required to serve in the armed forces, myself included. This kit was recommended by Drake and his crew, and shortly thereafter, our smuggling operations were leaked to the authorities. I need to know if he is working for anyone else. What connections does Apex have to the party that might suggest he is an undercover agent? The look on the face of the woman who went by the alias of Mirage after hearing her boss's words was like that of a woman who had just walked into a sulfur pit. She did not approve in the slightest of being spoken to in such a rude manner, but she did not have the guts to reprimand an underboss of the syndicate. Thus, she could only respond passive-aggressively as he answered the man's questions. Well, Butcher. The only thing I can find that is remotely similar to your request is that this kid is the son of a sector governor. However, he was disowned by his parents for whatever reason shortly after joining the Naval Academy on Germania. I could not find the exact reason behind it, no matter how badly I tried to search for an answer, but I do have some clues. It happened almost immediately after the pop sensation Erika Krieger lambasted him on social media for a picture he had taken with a member of the Kondo dynasty, leading me to believe that his parents believed the rumors of him sleeping with the Oni woman and thus expelled him from their family in an act to save face. After hearing this, the man nicknamed Butcher remained quiet for several moments as if he were deep in thought. After a while, he took off his helmet and took a deep breath of the purified air that was filtered through his carrier's life support system before speaking his thoughts on the matter. Despite your background as a former agent in the Imperial Intelligence Services, you are telling me that this kid has no connection with the authorities other than his father, who just so happens to be a high-ranking politician. Was Apex really just disowned by his parents for fucking an alien whore and left with nothing? Did this boy really turn to a life of crime just to support himself? Why does this story sound so familiar, Mirage? It was only after saying this that the man turned around to reveal his heavily scarred face. Like Erich and Mirage, he too was a mutant, one with blood-red hair which was cut into the style of a mohawk. His battle-worn face had a distinctive tattoo beneath his right eye, which was no doubt applied during a stint in a prison colony, as tattoos were only worn by those members of Germanic society who were a part of the criminal underworld. With a heavy sigh, Mirage responded to her boss with a melancholy tone in her hyper-feminine voice. It is what we as mutants have to do to survive. We are not allowed to marry or have children, so we turn to the arms of other mutants, or even aliens, for comfort. While the party expects us to fight and die for the expansion of their power and influence, they throw us to the wolves after we are no longer of any value to them. Where most of us turn to a life of crime in order to sustain ourselves. Apex's story is one as old as the Empire itself. It is of my professional opinion that he is not the rat, and thus you have no reason to act against him. No, whoever informed the Vaxcorian authorities about our business was definitely an insider. So you best turn your intention inwards, because from what I hear, after the way his last job ended, Apex is already considering returning to the life of a law-abiding citizen, but in 20 years, when his mandatory military service is completed, he will realize that he has no other choice but to come crawling back to us. Butcher did not respond for several minutes, instead he stared out of the window with his arms held behind his back, as if in deep contemplation. After some time, he finally spoke again, and in doing so gave his orders to his right-hand woman. All right, I believe you, I want this rat found and made an example of. If it turns out that he is a part of our outfit, then we better find him before the other underbosses do so, or God forbid, the boss himself does. As for Apex, leave him be for the time being. And when the boy finally realizes that no matter how good of a little soldier he is, that his fate was determined from the moment he was born, we will be waiting for him with open arms. After all, as a former ace pilot of the Black Sun myself, I know just how valuable of an asset Apex is to Splinter. Butcher shifted his gaze towards the window and remained silent. However, if one closely observed his reflection, they could see the data stream in his sanguine eyes, one which displayed a picture of himself, with a wife and kids. Something a mutant like himself should never have had. Chapter 36 The Battle of Thrakia. It did not take long for Erich and the rest of the First Armada to arrive at the blockaded world of Thrakia. What would have taken months for Erich's personal starship occurred in a matter of days for the massive warships of the Imperial Navy. After all, they carried significantly larger and more powerful quantum drives than a small expedition ship like the Privateer. When the First Armada arrived back at the front lines, they saw that the world was under siege and had been receiving an orbital bombardment by the entire Imperial Navy for God knows how long. Most of the world's structures were reduced to ruin, and its defenses were now nothing but rubble. Erich did not even have time to properly get caught up to date on the situation, because he and the rest of the thousands of pilots within the First Armada were immediately scrambled into action. After flying into Thrakia's orbit, Erich got a much better understanding of just how devastated the world's surface was. Despite over a year of conflict, the Thrakia consortium was still determined to fight until the last man. And though the Germanic armed forces had taken plenty of prisoners and conquered many worlds that had surrendered to them after bloody campaigns, it would appear that the home world of the Thrakia species was determined to die with their sovereignty intact. Every single piece of military equipment that was still left in the consortium's hands was deployed in defense of the home world, with countless drones flying through the sky while combating the forces of the Germanic Star-Empire. Erich skillfully maneuvered his interceptor, which was significantly faster and more agile than his Privateer, through the atmosphere of the besieged world as he targeted every hostile ship his sensors could pick up. By now piloting his starfighter was more instinct than actual conscious thought. Thus, he nimbly avoided any and all enemy fire, whether it come from railguns or missiles, before locking onto his first target and firing a missile towards the hostile drone. The missile exploded upon reaching the proximity of the target, and thus engulfed it in a massive explosion, leaving nothing left, not even a heap of scrap. Yet Erich did not celebrate. After all, it was just a drone fighter, and not an actual enemy pilot. Instead, he swiftly dodged an oncoming shot from another drone's railgun. While sweeping past the hostile drone, Erich fired a burst of his laser repeater, which shredded through the shields, and blasted the starfighter into smithereens. On the left and right sides of Erich's interceptor were two matching starfighters which were from members of his own unit, who fought alongside Erich as his wingmen. As the trio shot down a multitude of drones, a voice came over the comms, congratulating Erich on his 3,000th kill. "God damn Silber, that is 3,000 kills now. Why don't you save some of them for the rest of us?" Erich simply snorted as he pressed his throttle forward, which propelled him and his interceptor further into the fray. After narrowly avoiding a missile which was fired towards him, via a combination of countermeasures and some skilled flying, Erich swept past the hostile aircraft and shot it down with his plasma cannon. his shot ate right through the primitive shields of the aircraft and targeted its engines, which immediately exploded, and thus propelling what remained of the fighter straight into the ground, which crashed into a mostly destroyed building, bringing down what had previously survived the orbital bombardment. The battle continued to wage on for another 2 weeks, with Erich going back to his routine of getting very little sleep while maintaining a schedule of 22 full hours of combat. However, in the end, after the last vestiges of the Dvrakia resistance faded away under the intense onslaught of the Germanic armed forces, the president of the Dvrakia consortium capitulated. In an underground bunker on the Dvrakia homeworld, the president of the Dvrakia consortium and his surviving generals were in the middle of a call with Grand Admiral Emmerys from the Germanic Star-Empire. Admiral Emmerys was a sharply dressed man, in a white and gold military uniform, which varied greatly from the uniforms which other servicemen within the ranks of the imperial military wore. He had mid-length golden hair and blue eyes, along with a strong jawline and other masculine features. He was a rugged man, but a handsome one. When he activated the grid, his eyes would turn gold as a result of his nanite enhancements, which were a cut above those which most Germanic citizens were injected with at birth. The man had a calm and collected appearance as his holographic projection was displayed in the bunker. Though his face was stoic, his voice was filled with wrath and disdain as he spoke to the enemy who had forced him to fight so bitterly for a little over a year. So, you finally realize now that you have no choice but to surrender. Quite honestly, you could have saved yourself some trouble by doing this a year ago when your allies abandoned you to your fate. Your armies are defeated, your worlds are now under my control, you have nothing left, and now you decide to speak about terms of surrender? Perhaps if I did not have other matters to worry about, then I would exterminate your race to show an example to the galaxy of what happens to those who resist our conquest. But I have plans for your pitiful species, and thus, those of you who have survived thus far will be permitted to live, as I rebuild what has been destroyed so that it is better than ever before. The Dvrakians now have the honor of becoming the first vessel of the Germanic Star-Empire, and you should be kneeling before me, and thanking me for my benevolence. The Dvrakia president looked astonished when he heard what the Grand Admiral of the Germanic Star-Empire had said. He could hardly believe his ears and stammered in disbelief. You are letting us live. Grand Admiral Emmerys nodded his head silently, thus raising the hopes of all the Dvrakians who were hiding in the bunker, until he spoke his next words. I have no choice. I need a buffer, and thus, the Empire will invest in the total reconstruction of your civilization so that every world may resist that which is about to come. Show us the same determination you had when you fought our forces, and you will be greatly rewarded. Top VL updates on NOVPoundin.com. The moment the Dvrakia president heard these foreboding words, he once more began to stammer, this time out of fear, not disbelief. And what is precisely coming for us? Grand Admiral Emmerys did not hold back any punches as he responded to this question with the complete and honest truth. The Narku High Fleet terminus is on a path headed directly to our borders. And, since you have wasted a year of our time, we now only have a little under 2 years left before they arrive in our sphere of influence. While the cowards from our political party have fled to Alfheim in search of refuge, the military of the Germanic Star-Empire has decided to fight until the very last man. There will be no retreat, only victory or death, and you now have the honor of joining us in our heroic last stand. The president of the Dvrakia consortium immediately felt like crying when he heard this news. Had he known that a Narku High Fleet was on a direct course for his borders, he would have voluntarily given up control of his nation's territory and fled with as many of his people as he could towards the Enochian theocracy, who would have done their best to accommodate their vassals until they found a new place to call home. Instead, he had resisted the invasion of the Germanic Star-Empire and was now nothing more than a puppet to be thrown into the meat grinder against the galaxy's greatest menace. In all honesty, he could not envision a worse fate for his people, who had already suffered so severely against the Germanic war machine. But he had no choice now but to accept the vassalage which the GSE was willing to bestow upon him. Thus, he ordered all of his remaining generals and admirals to bow before their new suzerain, as the fate of the Dvrakia race now laid in the hands of their new overlords. We would be honored to fight alongside you for the continued survival of our two species. Though the Dvrakia president said these words, he could not feel anything but the opposite. Still, after a little over a year, the war had come to an end, and though it had progressed longer than the Germanic Star-Empire's admiralty had expected it would, they had achieved victory within a short enough time span that they could still muster a proper defense against Terminus and the horrors that lie in its high fleet. In the world of Alfheim, Empress Lunaria Asterion sat on her throne. In front of her was the supreme leader of the Germanic Star-Empire who bowed before her with the most courtesy he could afford to give. The beautiful elven empress had a rather excited expression on her face, as she informed her lackeys about what the rest of their race had been up to over this past year. I am sure that you would be glad to know that your brethren have just concluded their war with the Dvrakia consortium, and annexed the little devils into the Germanic Star-Empire where, for the time being, they will be your people's first vassals. Curious, isn't it? I thought you Germans hated everyone who was not of your own race. Hell, even now I can see in your eyes the disdain you have for my people. I never would have thought the day would come where your empire permitted a conquered species to live. The winds of change have come at last. Supreme Leader Hans EPP sweated profusely upon hearing the Alfheim Empress speak of the disdain he had for her. The anxiety he felt in his heart was visibly displayed on his face, to which Lunaria giggled like a schoolgirl before speaking in a rather heated tone, as if she were about to climax from the excitement she currently felt. What are you, nervous? Well, you shouldn't be. Part of what makes your people so tantalizing is just how cold you are towards everyone else, even your masters. The pride that your people have in your race, it is rare to see it be upheld in the face of overwhelming power. And while you might be nothing more than a pathetic dreg of your race who has fled in the face of death, I have no doubt that your Grand Admiral would be more than happy to stare me down and spit in my face if I were to ever threaten him. Oh, the thought of it makes me so dreadfully excited. Supreme Leader EPP was not the only one who looked at the Alfheim Empress as if she had a screw loose. Even her own daughter, Princess Celestia Asterion, stared at her as if she had gone well and truly mad. The young princess could not help but voice her disbelief at her mother's scandalous words. Mother. Despite being chastised by her own daughter, Lunaria did not seem to care. Such was the confidence of a galactic overlord. Instead, she sighed heavily before dismissing the supreme leader of the Germanic Star-Empire with a look of utter disappointment in her eyes. You can go now? I just wanted to tell you how bravely your people are fighting, even in the face of death. It was my hopes that perhaps their heroism would inspire you and your followers to return to your homeland to join their war for survival, but unfortunately it appears that I have overestimated you all. You lot truly are the dregs of your race. No wonder you all became politicians. After saying this, Lunaria motioned for her royal guard to escort the leaders of the Germanic Star-Empire's sole political party out of her palace and back to their embassy, where they would hide until the upcoming conflict with the Nurku Hive Fleet was decided. Chapter 37 Instructing the New Recruits. With the Dvrakia War having come to an end, the Germanic Star-Empire immediately shifted its focus to a mass military build-up, as well as transforming their newly conquered worlds into fortresses, which were designed to slow down the Nurku advance when they finally arrived in Germanic space. After the war ended in a Germanic victory, the Grand Admiral of the Imperial Navy set forth on overhauling the Dvrakia civilization so that it was suited for the harsh reality of the universe. Their borderline pacifistic ways had come to an abrupt and bitter end. Instead, the Dvrakia society had been overhauled from the ground up to mimic the Germanic Star-Empire. Considering that the Germanic Star-Empire had a specific distaste for alien life, their requirement for vassalization was fairly unique when compared to other civilizations. They did not desire a yearly tribute of resources and wealth, but rather the so-called human resources that the Dvrakia race had left over after the war. Despite the overwhelming destruction that the Dvrakia species endured over the past year, as a result of the Germanic invasion, they still had a population that was vastly larger than the Germanic Star-Empire. After all, the Germans had only managed to settle 100 worlds, while the Dvrakians had settled over 3 times that amount. Thus, as part of their preparations for the upcoming Nurku invasion, Grand Admiral Emmerys issued an edict to his newly conquered subjects. Every citizen capable of bearing arms in the newly formed Dvrakia Social Republic, whether male or female, was to be conscripted into military service effective immediately. Naturally, to accommodate this massive influx of military personnel, the Admiralty had agreed to temporarily integrate the newly formed Dvrakia Republican Guard into the already existing Germanic military. Thus, as of this moment, there were billions of Dvrakians who had begun serving on imperial vessels and alongside Germanic Star Marines, something which much of the Germanic armed forces did not appreciate. As for Erich, he found himself stationed on the frontiers of the Empire's new borders, on a world the Dvrakians called Kelvornax. It was a continental world with a wide range of climates. In many ways, this world was similar to Earth, albeit significantly smaller, as the planet was roughly the size of Mars. Currently, Erich and the other members of the Black Sun Squadron were tasked with training these new Dvrakia pilots on how to effectively use their light fighters in combat. With Erich being given the painful job of instructing a young Dvrakia woman by the name of Esilith, who had failed the test to become certified as a starfighter pilot multiple times now. Why the Admiralty had believed that individual training with one of their best ace pilots was the only way to help this young woman pass her exams, Erich did not know. But, regardless of his feelings about the task he had been given, the man was forced to endure this trial, and thus he watched in silence as his new student had yet again crashed into a planet's surface within the simulation. Esilith was a beautiful young Dvrakia woman, with blood-red skin, matching eyes, and short silver hair. Her horns were rather short and were curled in a way that was akin to the fictitious succubus. She had a pair of bat-like wings, and a short devil's tail which jutted out of her backside. The woman's unusually curvy body was concealed with an olive-green flight suit, and currently she was emerging from the holodeck on board the carrier, with a rather excited smile on her pretty face. she rapidly approached Erich, before expressing her hopeful thoughts aloud. So how did I do? Did I pass? Erich looked at the girl as if she were an imbecile. He could not believe that she could somehow think that she had passed after that performance and was quick to scold her because of it. Did you pass? Of course not. You literally crashed your starfighter into the fucking planet and killed yourself. Why on earth would I pass you? The red-skinned beauty immediately pouted as she began to argue with Erich about her performance and whether or not she deserved a passing grade. What do you mean? I shot down that bug. Clearly, that means I did a good job. Erich was beginning to believe that this woman was indeed a moron and simply scoffed as he heard the drivel which came from this alien woman's mouth. As much as she might think she had done well in the simulation, reality was a far different story, and thus he was quick to reprimand Eselet for her particularly sharp tongue. You think you did well? You chased after a drone with no regard for what was in front of or behind you. Yes, you managed to shoot down the fucking bug as he was attempting to climb back into the atmosphere, but you immediately rammed into the planet's surface directly afterward. Never before in my life have I seen someone so inept at piloting a starfighter. How on earth you were selected to serve in this position, I will never understand, but one thing is certain, I will be putting in my recommendation that you should be transferred to another position. Even after a whole week of private instruction, you are still a danger to yourself and everyone around you when you are given access to a cockpit. If it was even remotely possible for Eseletha's face to become any more red, then she was most certainly blushing in embarrassment at this moment, while pouting at the same time. Her cheeks were slightly puffed up, as if she had many things she wanted to say, but knew the man who was scolding her was correct in his assessment. Finally, she began to plead with Erich to reconsider his decision, as she latched onto the man's hand with her own, while firmly gripping it in place with her short claws. Erich winced in discomfort as he felt the woman's claws lock his hand in place, and though they were not breaking the skin, they were still unbearably uncomfortable. Please. Give me one last chance. I promise I will do better in the next simulation. Please, I'm begging you. The way the woman was avoiding her eyes from making contact with his own, while struggling to beg like a common dog, was somewhat endearing to Erich. And for the briefest of moments, he thought this living embodiment of a devil was actually quite cute. Rather than deal with the conflicted emotions that he currently felt, Erich looked away from the attractive demoness and sighed heavily before agreeing to give her one last chance. All right, fine, I will give you one last chance to pass your flight certification. If you still fail to do so, then I will have no choice but to transfer you to a more fitting position in the Navy. A wide smile lit up on the woman's pretty face, as her incredibly sharp teeth were fully displayed. She quickly shook Erich's hand rather over-enthusiastically while thanking him for his benevolence. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I promise I won't disappoint you. With this said, Erich sighed once more, before reiterating that this was indeed the woman's last chance to pass. Don't thank me yet. This is your last chance. So, in order to give you the best chances of success, we are going to spend the next month reteaching you the basics of flight and combat maneuvers. I cannot emphasize enough how much trouble I am going through to make sure you become a pilot, so do not waste my time. The fledgling Virakia pilot immediately snapped to attention and saluted Erich with a cheerful smile on her pretty face. Yes, sir. Like Erich had said, the two of them began spending a lot of time together, with Erich's entire schedule for the month being taken up with private lessons for this hopeless pilot. He honestly did not know why the Navy was wasting time and resources helping this girl become a pilot, but he was certain that she was closely related to somebody who held significant power and influence in the newly formed National Socialist Virakia Workers' Party, which was the new ruling entity of the puppet state. A full month had passed, and currently Erich was watching a holographic projection of what was going on in the holodeck, as Eselet began piloting her dagger for what might very well be the last time. The test was designed to mimic a real battlefield scenario, and the only way to achieve victory was through surviving until the very end and scoring a certain number of kills. The start of the scenario was quite easy, as all Eselet needed to do in the beginning was successfully take off from the carrier inside the simulation and head towards the battlefield with a wing of simulated comrades. The buxom demoness was breathing quite heavily as she struggled to cope with the anxiety that she currently felt. This anxiety only increased as she approached the battlefield, which was currently taking place over a simulated planet between the Germanic Navy and a Narku Hive fleet, which was based upon Terminus. The Virakia pilot took a deep breath as she gripped her joystick with excessive strength. She then pushed the throttle forward as she immediately activated her targeting array so that it would lock onto the nearest drone. It did not take long for Eselet to catch up to the enemies, where she immediately opened fire with both her laser repeaters and plasma cannon to ensure that the maximum damage was dealt in the shortest amount of time. Within seconds the drone exploded, allowing Eselet to quickly pass through the remains which the insectoid life form had left behind. She then used her thrusters to strafe around her next target, which she immediately opened fire upon. As Eselith continued to fight through the scenario, Erich watched as her instructor, along with several other officers of the Germanic Starfighter Corps who were surprised to see that the alien woman who was a repeated flunky just a month ago had somehow so quickly gained a grasp for flying. One of the officers even made a comment about it. While Erich stared anxiously at the holographic projection, fearing that some of his students' bad habits might resurface during the test. Amazing. It was just a month ago that I was certain this girl would flunk out of flight school, but now she has already managed to get through half the simulation without sustaining any significant damage. How the hell did you manage to get her up to speed so quickly, Silber? Erich did not respond to this question, and instead he watched the projection closely, noticing that a Nerku Reaper, which was a specialized close-quarters fighter variant of the drone, was rapidly approaching her 6. To which he instinctively reached out to his student with his telepathy, and in doing so, secretly violated the parameters of the test. Watch your 6. Eselith assumed this was just her mind reminding her of what her instructor had drilled into her head over the last month, and thus she immediately looked behind her, to get a better glimpse of her rear, where she noticed the Nerku Reaper was about to latch onto her starfighter, and shred it to bits. Realizing that she had just narrowly failed the test, Eselith's heart nearly exploded from the anxiety she was currently feeling, but her body reacted quicker than her mind, as she quickly dived towards the surface in an attempt to lose the enemy, while strafing around her pursuer so that she could get a side picture. Right when she saw the jaws of the insectoid latch out towards her starfighter, she used the plasma cannon which was mounted on a gimbal beneath the nose of her fighter, to unleash a storm of fire onto the bug, which caused it to explode right before it could rip open her cockpit with its mighty jaws and pincers. The explosion of the enemy target caused her ship to sustain some damage, but it was not enough to cause her to fail the test. Which after gaining control of her spiraling ship, Eselith shot back into orbit where she succeeded in taking out more drones and Reapers, until the GSE fleet was ordered to retreat. Where she immediately headed back to the carrier and landed on its deck. The simulation came to an abrupt stop after her successful landing, and revealed her score, which was just above the passing grade. To which she jumped out of the holodeck in excitement and ran towards her instructor. Even she did not know why she kissed Erich, but the overt display of affection between the instructor and his student immediately caught the gaze of the other officers, who felt the need to report Erich for fraternizing with another species. After several moments of kissing a stunned Erich, Eselith released herself from his embrace, without even realizing what she had done, or why she had done it. Before thanking the man for his assistance in helping her reach her goals. I can't believe it. I actually did it. And it is all thanks to you. Erich was stunned into silence, and even felt quite violated by the long snake-like tongue that had forced its way into his mouth. He looked in shock at his peers, who were giving him a disapproving glance, as if to say that they would definitely be reporting him for this incident to their superiors. It was only now, after seeing the awkward glances between the Germanic officers, that Eselith realized she had done something incredibly inappropriate, and recoiled in shock as she bowed her head in an attempt to gain forgiveness for her rash and intimate actions. She was blushing so profusely that even Erich would be able to detect the change in skin color around her cheeks, but luckily for her, nobody could see this, as her pretty face was directly facing the floor. I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. I got so excited and did something entirely inappropriate. Please forgive me. I promise it won't happen again. Erich had no idea how to respond to this incident. In truth, he saw Eselith as nothing more than an irksome thorn in his side that the Admiralty had forced upon him. Although now he had to admit she was an extremely attractive specimen of her species, far more so than the women he had seen in the Rekia porn. Unfortunately for him, there was no way he could possibly pursue a relationship with an alien like Eselith, and without a doubt, he was going to get reprimanded for this one kiss that he had no control over. Thus, he forcefully calmed his rapidly beating heart before scolding the young woman for her actions. What you just did was a serious violation of the Empire's Naval Code of Conduct. I could even bring you up on disciplinary charges for this violation. However, with context I think I can reduce your sentence to a matter of cleaning the latrines. You may have passed your flight certification just now, but that is no excuse for your behavior. Report to the janitorial staff, where you will be serving a 3-month stint before you are permitted to join the rest of the pilots in your unit. Eselith had gotten to know Erich quite well over this last month of being together, and she had never seen him this angry before. It was almost enough to make her cry. In a hasty moment she had given this man her first kiss, and now he was disciplining her. She was just about to argue with Erich when she noticed the looks the other officers were giving him. In that moment she suddenly remembered the strict penalties that the Germanic Star-Empire held for interspecies relations, and thus, she now realized how much of a taboo she had just violated. She may only be getting 3 months of janitorial duty, but Erich, who was a member of the Germanic race, he was definitely in for a whole mess of trouble thanks to her. And thus, knowing that he had been lenient with her, Despite the harsh punishment he was about to receive, Eselet struggled to choke back her tears as she saluted Erich, and just barely managed to respond in affirmation to her new orders. "Yes, sir." After saying this, Eselet ran off, no longer willing to face the man she had caused so much trouble for, especially after all the hoops he had jumped through to get her up to par with Imperial flight standards. As for Erich, he shook his head and sighed before looking sternly at his other officers. His words were not so much an admission of guilt, but one of understanding just how boned he was for this mishap. "All right, she is gone. You can both go run off now to your superiors and report me for something I had no control over. Fucking cunts." Surprisingly, the two officers looked at one another before breaking out into laughter. The higher ranking of the two men looked at Erich with what appeared to be envy before voicing his thoughts aloud. "Bro, what was it like?" This question shocked Erich, who raised his brow in disbelief before asking for clarification. "What do you mean? What was what like?" Contrary to what Erich expected, the clarification of the question did not come from the first officer, but the second one instead. "Her tongue, obviously. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I've been wondering what they feel like since we first started our war with these sexy devils. To think you would actually get one to kiss you. Man, I mean officially I have to reprimand you for such a thing, but honestly? I'm so jealous. Hey, I remember now, you are that guy from the controversy a few years back, you know that pop star reposted an image of you with that sexy Oni babe. Did you seriously smash her as well?" Erich looked at the two officers who appeared supremely interested in the subject, before scoffing in disbelief. No comment. After saying this, Erich walked away, where he could have sworn he heard the two men groan in defeat, with one of them even calling him a tease. It was only at this moment that Erich realized that there were more men in the Empire than himself who were sexually attracted to women from some of the more beautiful alien species. FTDEWUPDTS on NOVLN.com. Chapter 38, a dastardly plot by the Gimderi Trade Union. While the Germanic Star-Empire was currently in a phase of military build-up, an enemy they were not even aware they had begun to conspire against them. On the planet of Gimderi, the various trade princes had come together to speak about the recent conflict which the Germanic Star-Empire had emerged victorious in, and about the Narku Hive fleet which was approaching their borders. Pixel Goldentooth was among the most powerful and influential trade princes within the Gimderi race. If their species had anything close to approximating a proper leader, he would be it. In truth, he had primarily been the one responsible for spearheading the propaganda campaign, which had turned much of the galaxy against the Germanic race. At first, he thought these pesky humanoid creatures from the Western Quadrant were a minor nuisance, one who refused to join the galactic economy, and thus enter the control of the Gimderi Trade Union. However, with the current mass military buildup which the Germanic Star-Empire was undergoing, it was becoming increasingly clear to Pixel and several of the other trade princes that if left unchecked, the Germanic Star-Empire would inevitably prove disastrous to the Gimderi race as a whole. Especially after they realized just how much the goblinoid race had conspired against them. Even if the Germanic Star-Empire did not directly seek out vengeance against the Gimderi, the very idea of them surviving and eliminating a Narku Hive fleet while being a regional power would inevitably inspire other interstellar civilization to follow their path of self-sufficiency. If such a thing were to occur, then it would rapidly decrease the power and influence of the Gimderi Trade Union. This could not be permitted under any circumstances. Thus, Pixel Goldentooth had summoned his peers to discuss how to prevent the Germanic Star-Empire from surviving the onslaught of the Narku Hive fleet, which was currently heading towards their borders. "We can't allow these golden-haired shits to increase their military strength. It was bad enough when they began efforts to double the size of their armed forces just with their own population. However, after annexing the Dvarakia Consortium, they now have access to far more resources and manpower than what they were previously limited to. What we need to do is instigate a war, perhaps with a subgalactic power, so that the Germanic Star-Empire wastes its resources that they have recently accumulated. This way, they will have a far lower chance of surviving the Hive fleet terminus." Another trade prince, who was just as ghastly in appearance as Pixel, was quick to nod his head in agreement before voicing his own opinion on the matter. "It has become clear to me that this so-called Germanic Star-Empire has become a threat to our continued power and influence over the galaxy. They have managed to achieve military power in parity with Tier 3 regional powers, while only holding 36 systems beneath their control. Now they have access to over 300. It is impossible to know just how much power and influence they will achieve in the coming years. It is only a matter of time before other interstellar civilizations try to emulate the Germanic society. We cannot allow this to happen, and since we cannot manipulate their economy, as it is entirely self-sufficient, we must manipulate another power into declaring war on the Germanic Star-Empire. So long as they are not facing imminent extinction, the Alfheim Empress will not interfere with a military conflict. Thus, we can waste their resources until the Narku take care of their pesky race once and for all. Despite the words of this specific trade prince, another and more hideous-looking elderly Ghimderi by the name of Keld Silvergleam was quick to voice his disapproval with this plan, not because he found it to be unethical. No, there was not a single Ghimderi would disagree with this proposal based upon something as inconsequential as morality. No, he disagreed with this plot specifically because he believed the fascination which the Alfheim Empress had in her newest pets was something that his peers were underestimating, and thus he was quick to voice this concern. I believe you are all failing to realize how much of an infatuation Empress Lunaria Asterion has with the Germanic race. I have it on good authority that she has said some rather obscene things about her desires towards the men of the Germanic Star-Empire, specifically their Grand Admiral, who currently seems to be leading the empire in its efforts to prepare for the Narku High Fleet. She will naturally be able to detect any hostile moves we make towards her precious pets, and will not easily forgive them, especially as they are now fighting for their very survival. I believe if we were to encourage one of our puppets to declare war against the Germanic Star-Empire, then it won't be long before the Alfheim Dominion mobilizes its forces to blockade our home world. If that happens, our wealth will vastly diminish, as will our control over the galaxy. Pixel's plump little fingers curled so much that his claws began to dig into the flesh of his palm. He gnashed his overly sharp teeth in response to Keld Silvergleam's words before voicing his distaste for the Alfheim Empress and her race as a whole. Those damned light elves, they think because their military is superior to our own, that they actually have a say in how far our influence spreads. Absolutely disgusting, the lot of them. If they were more easily manipulated, like their dark-skinned cousins, then perhaps we wouldn't be having this problem. Regardless of what that damned whore thinks, the Germanic Star-Empire and their entire race must be eliminated. Their very existence is a threat to our power. And if the Alfheim Empress decides to get in our way, then we will just convince the other galactic powers to restrain her. No matter how powerful the Alfheim military is, they cannot win a war against the entire galaxy. As for their bitch of a crowned princess, she needs to be humbled. For such a foolish little girl to speak to me with those vile words, I think we need to teach her a lesson. We need to capture her alive and soil her purity. Perhaps after being sold to the Dark Elves, she will learn some proper respect. All in favor of coercing a subgalactic power to declare war against the Germanic Star-Empire, and for the kidnapping of the Alfheim crown princess. The vote was unanimous as each and every trade prince within the Ghimderi trade union agreed to start a war with the Germanic Star-Empire via the use of a proxy, and to kidnap the Alfheim crown princess so that they could gift her to the Svartalfheim Federation as a pleasure slave. Almost immediately after the meeting between the trade princes took place, Lunaria received a call from Keld Silvergleam. He did not intend to warn Lunaria about the schemes of his peers simply out of the goodness of his heart, but rather out of greed. To the Ghimderi, nothing was above wealth and power, even their own race. In fact, it was to be expected that at least one of the Ghimderi trade princes would sell out their own kind in pursuit of a quick buck. After hearing everything that the elderly trade prince had to say, Lunaria gazed in disgust towards the hideous goblinoid creature, more so than usual. She was utterly furious that they had not only desired to drive her favorite pets into extinction but also were planning to go after her own daughter with such despicable methods. The fury a mother had when her children were targeted was not something easily calmed. And thus, she sent a substantial fortune to the trade prince, who had warned her while also returning the favor. Humph, how impetuous of your peers to think that they can get their hands on my precious daughter, and turn her into a plaything for those hideous dark-skinned freaks. All because she spoke the truth about your people. Well, I will show them. When Pixel's agents come for my daughter, I will have their genitals mutilated before feeding them to the wretches they belong to through a straw. As for the punishment that I have in store for your peers, I believe I will leave that up to my precious puppies. Once they have fully grown, I will tell them of what your despicable race has done to them, and what you all will continue to do throughout the coming years. Then I will watch as they latch their jaws around your gangly necks, before ripping out your throats with their sharp teeth. Naturally, I will spare the Silvergleam cartel, or at least make the best efforts to do so. But if I were you, I would flee from your so-called homeworld before the Germans arrive. Because when they do, it will not be easy to appease their fury. Not after they learn all which you have done to them. No, I believe only the extermination of your entire race will satiate their bloodlust. And I personally look forward to the day the name Ghimderi is just an embarrassing memory in the history of the galaxy. It was only now that Keld Silvergleam was beginning to regret his decision to inform the Alfheim Empress of the plans that his peers had concocted. She was beyond furious, and it would appear that even though he had warned her in advance, she would not make much of an effort to spare him and his cartel when the day of reckoning finally arrived. Perhaps Pixel was right all along. The Germanic people needed to be erased from the galaxy, for if they were not, then it would mean disaster for the Ghimderi race. After all, the Ghimderi were not warriors, they were not skilled in the art of war. Their biology basically prevented them from being proficient in such noble pursuits. They were only good at coercing the other races to commit violence on their behalf. But with the rapid rate which the Germanic Star-Empire was developing, and the animosity that the Alfheim Dominion now had towards the Gimderi trade union, it was only a matter of time before they found themselves embroiled in a war with two galactic powers. When that happened, perhaps even the combined might of the Asuran Cabal, the Svartalfheim Federation, and the Ennead theocracy would not be enough to save his people. After all, the Germanic Star-Empire had thus far shown a remarkable ability to punch above their own weight, and by the time they were truly a galactic power in their own right, whether this took a millennium or 100, they would be able to effectively counter at least two galactic powers on their own. After all, even the most militant of the galactic powers, which was the Alfheim Dominion, admired the proficiency in which the Germanic race engaged in violence. Chapter 39 Dvrakia Mating Habits. With the war between the Germanic Star-Empire and the Dvrakia Consortium now a thing of the past, Erich found that he had an exceptional amount of free time on his hands. When he was not training new pilots like Esilith, he usually spent time in the mess hall socializing with the other crewmen of the carrier. Despite the trouble she had caused him, Esilith did not appear capable of staying away from Erich, and thus, she almost always met up with him in the mess hall whenever he was there. How she was able to so expertly track his movements when he did not operate on a fixed schedule, he did not know, but she had succeeded in doing this over and over again. After discussing his paranoia with another one of the recruits he was training, the man looked at Erich with an odd expression before explaining what was going on. However, he did so in a hushed voice as if what he was about to say absolutely could not be overheard by outsiders. This might sound like a weird question, but were the two of you physically intimate with each other in any way that would have exchanged body fluids? Erich was immediately taken aback by this question. He looked around to see if anyone was listening in on his conversation before responding in an equally hushed tone. Well, I mean, she kissed me. The Dvrakia recruit seemed to have come to a certain understanding as he nodded his head, as if the answer was obvious from the start. Upon seeing that Erich was still confused, the man sighed and shook his head before responding. Our species evolved to mate for life. And though some Dvrakians choose not to do so, it is still tradition. If bodily fluids are exchanged between two Dvrakians, whether it's a kiss or something more intense, they will be able to sniff out that other person and their whereabouts so long as they are within a certain distance of one another, and it's a pretty large distance. I'm actually quite surprised by this news. You may not be aware of this, but it is a major taboo for a Dvrakia to be physically intimate with someone from another species. To put it in simple terms, by kissing you, Esilith has essentially made it impossible for her to ever mate with another Dvrakia, especially if news of this were to ever get out. All test novel on novelbin. Cm. I won't say a word about this to anyone, but yeah, that's why she is able to find you so easily. As long as the two of you are on the same ship, she will instinctively know where you are at all times of the day. This news had shocked Erich to the core of his being. It took him several moments to process what he had heard before he finally asked the immediate question on his mind. Are you saying that Esilith wants to mate with me? The Dvrakia recruit looked at Erich as if the man was as dense as a neutron star while he slowly nodded his head before responding in confirmation. Obviously. She would not have kissed you if that was not her intention. Even if she did it instinctively in a moment of great excitement, there is only one reason a member of our species would be so physically intimate with someone else. Though good luck ever getting into such a relationship with her. From what I hear, your species has actually made it a capital offense to engage in interspecies relations. Even I think that's a bit harsh. But every civilization has a reason for its rules and traditions, so I'm not going to judge. Despite saying this, there was a very clear look of disdain in the trainee's eyes, as if Erich's entire existence disgusted him. Perhaps it was partially out of jealousy, as well as cultural taboos. After all, Esilith was an exceptionally attractive member of her species, and for her to be taken by a foreigner, it was truly an intolerable offense to most Dvrakians. Naturally, Erich did not take offense to such an expression, because it was the same one which his entire species had looked at him with since the day he was born. He was more than used to being hated by people simply for existing, and thus he did not let it get to him. At lunch on the next day, Esilith naturally found her way to the mess hall, and sat in front of Erich with a wide smile on her pretty face. She had not said a thing about their kiss since it had happened. Until now, that is. I'm glad to see you didn't get into trouble because of me. I know how serious your race treats incidents like that, and the last thing I wanted to do was cause any trouble for you. Can you please forgive me? Just when Erich was about to say that there was nothing to forgive, he saw the figure of a man he was not expecting to see enter into the mess hall. An enormous smile appeared across Erich's face as he entirely ignored Esilith and her apology, before rushing over to the entrance to the mess hall. Erich wrapped his arms around the man's back and hugged him tightly before screaming in excitement. Carl! What the hell are you doing here? It's been too long? How have you been? Carl immediately smiled and shook Erich around, as he expressed his joy at seeing his old friend. Haha, you magnificent bastard. I knew you were still alive. Frederick and Dolph owe me 10,000 creds each. As for why I am on board your ship, I have been transferred. I will spare you the details, but let's just say my co got extremely pissed at me for something that was completely out of my control, and so he transferred me. This sudden news shocked Erich, though he was happy he would not be able to regularly interact with one of his few friends in this unforgiving universe. He was more shocked that Carl was surprised to see that he was still alive and was quick to interrogate the man on that subject. I'm sorry, what? What do you mean? Why wouldn't I be alive? Carl looked at Erich funny, before expressing his thoughts more clearly. His light-hearted nature seemed to have shifted to a more grim tone as he did so. Well, you know that not everyone who died in the war came back, right? I mean, there were times where our fleets were pushed beyond the borders of our data ships. Because of this, some of the guys who died were not cloned. After all, they did not receive the signals which were supposed to inform the cloning facilities to revive them. You haven't contacted us in so long that the guys and I made a betting pool. I was the only one who actually betted that you were still kicking. After all, I saw you in that tournament. There was no way these red devils would have been able to kill you. It was only now that Carl noticed Eselet eyeing Erich with pouty eyes, which he was quick to mention. Hey dude. That succubus is eyeing you right now. Do you want me to tell her to fuck off? Succubus was a derogatory term that many of the Germanic soldiers used to refer to the female members of the Dvrakia Republican Guard who were now serving aboard the fleets of the Germanic Star-Empire. Not every soldier in the Germanic armed forces was as open-minded as Erich. In fact, many of them still viewed the Dvrakians as enemies and outsiders. After all, it was not that long ago that they were fighting a war with each other. Carl appeared to be one of these men, which surprised Erich, as he quickly defended Eselet from his bigotry. Hey, don't call her that, man, Eselet is. She's a friend of mine. So don't you dare disrespect her like that. Carl took another glance at Eselet, and the way she was looking at Erich, causing a look of astonishment to overwhelm the man, as he stared at Erich in disbelief before uttering his thoughts aloud. No way. There's no fucking way you got lucky with a hot alien babe for a second time. Erich immediately stared at Carl and silenced the man. He then looked around to see if anyone had heard him, before reprimanding his friend for nearly causing a misunderstanding. It's not like that, you moron. Are you trying to get me killed? We are just friends. That is all there is to it. Carl scoffed, clearly not believing a word that Erich had said, before lecturing the man about his bad habits. Just like how you were just friends with that Oni babe, right? Not buying it, dude, just look at the way she is looking at you. There's clearly something going on between the two of you. You've got to introduce me. Maybe she has a friend you can hook me up with. Come on, man, I'm dying out here. You may not know the pains of being an eternal virgin, but have some fucking empathy. Erich shoved Carl away from him, before reminding the man of the consequences of what he was trying to do. Bro, do you have a death wish? You know that such a thing can get you a death sentence, right? Besides, the Dvrakians are almost as strict about that as we are. Even if Eselet had a friend who is half as hot as she is, it is unlikely that she would ever consider being intimate with you. I don't know if you are aware of this, but Dvrakians made for life, dude. Carl looked at Erich with suspicion in his eyes. The fact was that when it came to xenobiology, the Empire only cared to learn the best ways to kill alien species. They did not regard things like mating habits to be worthy of intellectual pursuit. The fact that Erich knew this only increased Carl's certainty that the guy was boning Eselet, which he immediately voiced aloud. Okay, you are telling me you know something as obscure as the Dvrakia mating habits, but you two aren't hooking up? Not buying it, bro. Erich truly didn't have a response to this. He didn't even think about the Empire's lack of knowledge on such a subject, and thus he merely averted his gaze, refusing to comment any further. Eventually Eselet got sick of pouting in silence, and approached Erich, where she immediately requested an answer to her previous question. Erich, you left me all alone at our table. And you still haven't answered my question. Erich's silver eyes quickly shifted their gaze between his two friends. He had to be careful how he answered this question, or Carl would never be convinced that they were just friends, and thus he sighed heavily before saying the bare minimum that he could get away with. You don't need to worry about that, Eselet, it's fine. Just don't do it again. Carl eyed the two lovebirds with suspicion, before forcefully introducing himself to the Dvrakia beauty. I'm Carl, by the way. Erich and I attended the academy together and are pretty good friends. I hear your name is Eselet. It is a pleasure to meet you. Eselet had barely heard what Carl had said, because she was too busy pouting over the idea that Erich had told never to be intimate with him again. But that wasn't possible for her. After all, everywhere she went, she could smell the mark she had placed upon him, something that would never wash away. Hell, even when she slept, she could sense his presence, which helped soothe her. This wasn't even taking into account the fact that the two of them were going to be on the same ship together for many years. If she could not further express her feelings properly, then she might actually go mad with lust. Hell, even at this moment, she wanted nothing more than to kiss Erich, but she was forced to control herself, because if either of their two species witnessed them together, it could only spell trouble for the two of them. She damn nearly got herself exiled, and Erich executed the last time she let her feelings get the better of her, a mistake she refused to ever make again. As for Erich, he could tell that he had seriously offended the girl with his remark, and thus he blushed over so slightly as he looked away and communicated something that only Eselet managed to hear. Okay. Maybe when we are alone we can do that again. And more. At first Eselet thought that she was mishearing things, as Erich had appeared to have said it in a voice so low that nobody else appeared to have heard it, not even the man who was standing in front of them. But the look on his face confirmed that he had indeed said such a thing. Naturally, the Dvrakia beauty was unaware that Erich had the ability to communicate his thoughts with this mind, and thus she just assumed that he had indeed said the words, but in a way that only she managed to hear them. As a result, her pouting expression immediately shifted to one of excessive joy. She had to force herself from glumping the man, no matter how much she wanted to do so. Chapter 40 A Brief Vacation. Months passed, and during this time Erich had mostly been working as a flight instructor. His students were members of both the Imperial Navy and Dvrakia Republican Guard. And as a result, there were fresh new faces who entered Erich's pool of trainees with each passing day. The flight school, which Erich ran on board the carrier, consisted of a series of simulations, and once the trainees had received their certification through these simulations, they would then move on to practical flight experience. Something which should have been easy, but for whatever reason had proven quite difficult for many of the Dvrakia recruits. Eselet had just barely managed to pass her flight certification, and the moment she got into an actual cockpit, it ended exactly as Erich had expected, with the claps of a woman crash-landing her dagger in the hangar bay. Naturally, it fell to Erich to discipline the Dvrakia beauty for her failures, which usually resulted in some proper alone time between the two of them. At first the couple had only experimented with kissing and touching, but Eselet's increasing lust became difficult for Erich to control, and eventually he had no choice but to make love to the woman. How long Erich would be able to keep this taboo relationship a secret? He did not know, but he found himself enjoying the time he spent with Eselet more than anything else in his current life. Eventually, 8 months had passed, and the time for Erich's scheduled leave of absence had come. Thus, on the last day of active duty, before he was able to get a break, he popped a question to Eselet that she was not expecting. So, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I actually have a starship of my own, which is currently in storage. I was wondering, since you are also about to go on leave, why don't we take a brief vacation, far away from the borders of the Empire, just the two of us? Eselet looked at Erich with glimmering eyes. She had not expected the man to make such an offer to her. In fact, she was dreading the day that they were finally apart from one another for several months at a time. But it would appear that her fears would not be realized. Thus, she smiled and nodded her head in excitement before accepting Erich's offer. That sounds wonderful. Assuming you can get the approval, where did you have in mind? Naturally, there was only one part of space Erich wanted to go to more than any other, but he had wanted to do so while single. He couldn't very well spread his seed across the Great Oni Empire when he was in a rather serious relationship with Eselet, thus he was actually quite dumbfounded when he heard this question, not knowing where they could possibly go for their brief vacation. Eselet could see that Erich was stumped, and thus immediately voiced her opinion on the matter, hoping that he would take it seriously. Well, if you don't already have a place in mind, then there is one place I have always wanted to visit. Although, I highly doubt you will ever get the approval required to go there, considering your people's complex history. This statement had caused Erich to become quite interested in where Eselet wanted to go, and thus he was quick to inquire further about the subject. Well, what were you thinking about? You don't need to worry about obtaining the proper clearance, I have my ways around that. Just tell me the destination which you desire to visit and I will make it a reality, so long as we are able to get there and back in time. Eselet's blood-red eyes darted back and forth, looking for any possible eavesdropping, before whispering about the place she wanted to visit most of all. Earth. Erich recalled in shock when he heard this answer. Earth was indeed a tricky subject in the Empire. Much of the Germanic society refused to speak about their roots as a genetic offshoot of humanity. The fact that they had been forced to abandon their home world and stake their claim out in the galaxy was a source of great humiliation for Erich's people. To visit Earth was practically an act of treason, and if he did succeed in getting there, it would have to be a secret that he would keep for the rest of his life. UP FRM no VE pound, IN.C.O.M. But then again, the same could be said about his relationship with Esileth. Erich could see the pleading look in the woman's eyes, and was quick to change the subject. How do you even know about that, anyway? It is not exactly common knowledge outside of the Empire. Esileth looked at Erich with confusion in her sanguine eyes before answering him honestly. Well, I read about it, of course. On your interstellar network. There are plenty of chat groups dedicated to reclaiming Earth, and I was curious. I have to admit that I was surprised when I learned that the Germanic race is actually the result of your ancestors fleeing from your home world and rapidly evolving your species through mass genetic augmentation. Erich immediately calculated the distance between the Germanic Star-Empire and Earth. It was 1800 light-years away, which would be several months' worth of travel with his current ship. He would also have to routinely stop along the way for refueling in unfriendly sections of space. In fact, now that he thought about it, the navigation charts towards Earth were a closely kept secret by the military. It was not exactly something the average citizen of the Germanic Star-Empire could get their hands on. Even if Erich could access that information, the resources required to make the journey were monumental. At the very least, he'd have to invest in a new quantum drive, one that had better performance than his stock model. After several moments of thought, Erich shook his head and denied Esileth's request, stating that it was simply unfeasible to make the journey at this point in time. I'm sorry, Esileth. There are too many reasons why we won't be able to make that journey, time being one of the primary factors. Maybe someday I will be able to take you there, but for now, it is just not in the cards. The red-skinned beauty immediately began to sulk as she heard this, though she knew little about the difficulty they would have to endure just to visit Earth and return to the Empire alive. She really wanted to see the home world of the man she loved. But she supposed it just wasn't meant to be, thus she came up with another idea, which unfortunately Erich was also forced to decline. Then what about the planet you grew up on? Alemania, right? That's not too far away and is well within the borders of the Empire. You might even be able to introduce me to your family as a friend. There was another hopeful look in Esileth's glimmering red eyes, yet Erich did not share her enthusiasm. In fact, he appeared quite wounded over the suggestion, which immediately caused the woman to become concerned as she inquired about what she had said that made him this way. I'm sorry. Did I say something wrong? Erich took a deep breath and shook his head before informing Esileth why it was not possible to visit Alemania and introduce her to his family. No, it's nothing that you said. It's just that I'm afraid that is also not an option. You see, my father is the sector governor of the region, and he has disowned me for reasons I do not wish to get into right now. Even if I wasn't exiled from my family, the only person who would actually be happy to meet a friend of mine would be my mother, and if she were to find out the truth between us, then even she would be disgusted with me, again. Esileth gasped in shock when she heard this information. She did not know that Erich had been disowned by his family, but she could only imagine what would drive his parents to do such a horrible thing. Even though she knew that Erich did not want to speak about the issue further, Esileth could not help herself, and asked anyway. I know you said you don't want to talk about this, but I can't help but wonder what you did to receive such treatment. It wasn't anything bad, was it? A slight scoff emerged from Erich's lips as he shook his head. There was a bitter tone in his voice as he begrudgingly spoke about what had happened. No, it wasn't anything bad, unless you would also consider our relationship to be a bad thing. To make a long story short, I had a brief relationship with an Oni woman. My father found out, and he disowned me. In all honesty, the whole thing was quite the scandal. There was even an investigation conducted by the authorities. In fact, the only reason I have not been executed is because someone powerful in the Empire buried the story and denied the allegations against me. Even though they were completely true. Esileth had a sympathetic look on her face and was just about to say something when a familiar voice interrupted her. I knew it. You did bang that Oni babe. And here you are hiding your relationship with sweet little Esileth here. You, sir, are a player. Erich and Esileth both looked up in dismay at where the voice had come from, to see that Karl was silently observing their conversation the entire time. He then jumped down from the alcove he was hiding in and confronted Erich with a look of fury in his eyes. You bastard. Why didn't you tell me you were disowned by your parents? I would have gladly helped you out, hell we all would have. When something like that happens, you come to your friends for support. Erich was surprised to hear this come from Karl. He had never informed his friends at the academy what had happened to him during his first winter vacation. Instead, he acted as if everything was still normal for several years. As for Esileth, she was quite upset that Karl had interrupted her, and began to pout in silence, waiting for Erich to finish up his conversation with the man who she considered being a bad influence. However, Karl's next words clearly aggravated her. It's decided, you, me, Dolph, and Frederick, we are going to the Great Oni Empire once we get our leave. I don't care what anyone says. You have a starship, right? How many beds does it have? Erich appeared slightly aghast at Karl's suggestion, but he did not outright deny him, at least not immediately. Instead he entertained him at first. Well, 4, but... However, before he could finish his sentence, Karl grabbed hold of Erich's shoulder and gave him a thumbs up before responding. That's perfect. It has been a while since the 4 of us got together, and unlike you, who keeps managing to attract alien babes, we are all still turbo virgins. You are taking us to the great Oni Empire so that we can finally become men, and that's final. Erich looked over at Eselet for support, but she simply snubbed him and walked away, but not before leaving her feelings out in the open. Oh fine, forget about me. You go hang out with your friends and screw your way through that entire empire of horn sluts. See if I care. Immediately Erich ran after the girl, who was clearly upset by the conversation that Karl had started on his own, leaving his best friend behind to feel like an idiot. Wait. Eselet. Come on. It's not like that. Upon seeing Erich scamper off like a whipped hound, Karl reached into his uniform's pocket and pulled out a pack of cigarettes, which he immediately began to smoke. He stared towards the area that his friend had run off to, before shaking his head and voicing his disapproval. That succubus has you wrapped around her pretty little finger. Chapter 41 Blackmailed. The day for Erich's leave of absence finally arrived, and yet, Eselet was still angry with him for even entertaining Karl's suggestion of sex tourism as a vacation idea. Thus, the red-skinned beauty had returned to her home world to visit her parents without Erich. As for Erich, he had informed Karl that he would not be taking him and the boys on a trip to the Great Oni Empire, and instead found himself once more visiting the bars on the industrial world of Quarry where the carrier he served upon was currently docked for regular maintenance. While sitting in the middle of a bar and drinking his legal limit of beer for the day, Erich was looking at the grid with his mind. In particular, he was reviewing his account balance, which had grown quite a bit after roughly 2 years of active service in the military. If one counted the fortune he had acquired mostly through ill-gotten gains, then Erich would have made approximately 6 million credits since he had first been disowned by his parents, over half of which had gone to the purchase of his ship, and the lifetime insurance on it. This meant that he still had roughly 2.5 million credits left over, which was currently sitting in his bank account accumulating dust. And while Erich could invest a part of this sum into the stock market, he had something else entirely in mind. What Erich wanted more than anything at this moment was a home of his own. One where he and Eselet would not be interrupted, where they would be free to be intimate with one another without having to look over their shoulders in fear of the authorities finding out about their illicit relationship. Thus, even though the woman was currently angry at him, he decided that he would search the grid for the purpose of house shopping. The imperial real estate market was complicated, to say the least. While individuals were free to use their earnings to buy larger and more luxurious abodes, the government would provide a basic home free of charge which could house a family of up to 7 people. Of course, one had to be married to qualify for this benefit, and since Erich could not get married, nor could he reveal his relationship with Eselet, he would have to find a place that could support the two of them, but was also small and inexpensive enough as to not alert the authorities to his ill-gotten gains. After all, he had committed multiple felonies to obtain his current small fortune. And he did not want to spend the rest of his life in either a penal colony or a penal battalion. And while 2.5 million credits could buy him a fairly nice home on one of the core worlds, or a decent-sized mansion in the frontier, Erich would easily draw suspicion to himself if he dropped such a large sum of credits on a house that he technically did not require. Or so he thought, but, after 30 minutes of drinking while browsing the market, a familiar face sat down next to him. Erich did not believe his eyes as he witnessed the cobalt-haired beauty who had once been his contact in the interstellar crime syndicate known as Splinter. The woman quickly ordered a drink, which she began to chug as if she had not quenched her thirst in months. After finishing the beer with ease, she turned around and looked at Erich with a worried smile on her pretty face before speaking up. Apex, fancy meeting you here. Do you mind if I have a minute of your time? Erich's body froze in place when he heard the woman openly refer to him by the alias he had used to accept underworld jobs, and just when he was about to decline her offer, she said something which shocked him to the core. You are looking for a house, no doubt because you want some privacy with that hot piece of alien as which you have exclusive access to. Like I said before, I'm not one to judge, Anadhrakia? Nice choice if I do say so myself. Nothing quite like having a conquered subject serve you sexually, am I right? Anyway, let's talk business. Not only can I help you get a place that would really impress that little succubus of yours, but I can keep the authorities from prying into your business as well. And all I ask in return is a little favor from you. Erich was shocked that this woman had dug up so much damning information on him, and as much as he wanted to shoot her in the face here and now, he simply did not have the guts to do so. Instead, he forced himself to remain calm as he took a sip from his beer before responding with what was obviously a forced expression of stoicism on his face. I have no idea what you are talking about. Despite the confidence in Erich's tone, the woman simply scoffed before signaling to the bartender to get her and her friend another set of beers, which caused Erich to immediately glance around in panic. After all, such a thing was illegal. Yet, neither the bartender nor the other patrons actually seemed to give a damn. Once the beers were in their hands, Miraj spoke in a coy tone. Come now, Erich, there is no need to be so tense. You are with friends right now, friends who are both very powerful and in need of your assistance. If you scratch our back, we will scratch yours as well. Miraj then chugged the next beer in the same way she had done to the last one, which the bartender immediately refilled for the woman. Erich was now incredibly anxious. Not only did the woman know about his identity, but she also knew about Eseleth as well. This immediately put Erich on alert, but he did not make any rash moves. Instead, he voiced his disbelief aloud. How? How do you know so much about me? In response to this question, Miraj simply groaned, as if she hated to recall the job she used to do for the imperial government. If you must know, I used to be what the government refers to as a watcher for the Imperial Intelligence Services, or the IIS for short. My entire job was obtaining information through the grid. You think your talents as a slicer are good? The nanites I received at birth were specifically calibrated for spying on others and slicing into computer systems. I assure you, there is nothing in this universe that the Empire can keep a secret from me. In fact, I have been watching you from the cameras on board your carrier for some time now. I know all about your little taboo relationship, and if you want to keep that secret between the two of you, I suggest you listen to my proposal. Knowing that he had no choice but to listen to the cobalt-haired woman and accept her job, Erich sighed heavily, before relenting. All right, fine, I will hear you out. The woman wore a pretty smile as she patted Erich on the back as if they were old friends before complimenting him in a rather conceited tone. Good boy. You see, that wasn't so hard, was it? Immediately after saying this, Miraj's expression and tone shifted to a very grave state as she leaned in and whispered something to Erich. I have to apologize about that last job. We had no idea there was a mole on our end who had been feeding information to the Vaxcovian authorities. But thanks to you, we now know who he is, and hence I have a little favor to ask of you. You see, the guy who leaked the information about your last job, he is a high-ranking member of our organization, completely untouchable by a pleb like me. In fact, he is one of my employer's rivals. Normally I would order one of my hitmen to take care of this, but this situation requires an outsider's touch. I need you to take care of that fucking rat once and for all. All I need you to do is take him out. As for the more difficult task of preventing him from being cloned into another body, you leave that to me. If you do this for me, not only will my boss pay you 25 million credits, but he will make sure the authorities don't fuck with you about any potential non-violent infractions that you might end up getting yourself involved with from now on. For example, if someone were to find out about your little relationship with the Dvarakia girl, we can make those charges disappear. I won't say that you will be a full-fledged member of Splinter after doing this for us, but you will be an associate, and that has its own perks. What do you say? Are you in? Erich sighed heavily in defeat after hearing what he was being extorted to do. He then chugged the remainder of his beer before staring Miraj deep in her blood-red eyes, where he asked a question that he already knew the answer to. And if I refuse? A devilish smile appeared on Miraj's face as she leaned in and whispered something to Erich, which sealed his fate. Then I will leak all the videos I have of you and your little girlfriend to the grid. You two really ought to be more careful. It was quite easy for me to get footage of the two of you in action. I mean, the body on that girl? Wow, I have to give you props. I don't know how you managed to score a babe of her quality. I don't think I need to remind you that you have already been accused of interspecies relations once before, and though I don't know why the Grand Admiral covered for you, he won't be able to do so this time around. After all, with such overwhelming evidence out there in the ether, nobody will be able to deny that you are a fucking race traitor. And that is a serious crime, now isn't it? Though Erich was surprised to learn that the Grand Admiral was the one who had saved his neck, he was more concerned with the sword of Damocles that was currently hanging over his neck. Thus, he sighed heavily once more before he accepted the incredibly dangerous job. After all, if what this woman had said about her background was true, then she most definitely would have been able to get that kind of dirt on him. Though Erich did not know just how far the reach of Splinter went, the more he learned about the shadowy syndicate, the more he began to fear it. Thus, he accepted the job, even though every fiber of his being was warning him not to. All right, when you put it like that, I guess I have no choice but to accept. Miraj broke out into a cheery smile once more while she patted Erich on the back yet again. Good boy. You will receive the details within the hour, and by the way, I suggest you bring that makeshift piece of crap you call power armor, because your target is going to be guarded by some serious killers. See you around the stars, lover boy. After saying this, Mirage stood up and walked out of the bar. Meanwhile, Erich ordered another drink, knowing that there was a million ways for this job to go wrong. GTT the eltist VLS at .o, we, el by. Go. Chapter 40 to the Reaper. Shortly after Mirage departed from the bar, Erich received an encrypted message which informed him of the details of his mission. The methods which he used to eliminate the target, whose alias appeared to be Spectre, were entirely left up to him, but it was recommended that he at least bring a decent set of armor, due to the highly fortified nature of his target's location. What was this location, you might ask? Well, surprisingly, it was not some hidden moon based on the fringes of Imperial space. On the contrary, according to this encrypted message, Spectre was hiding in plain sight in the middle of the Empire's capital. Much to Erich's surprise, the target was located at the Imperial Naval Academy on Germania. Though Erich did not know how this was possible, as only cadets and military personnel were permitted to enter the academy, let alone live on campus, there was no mistaking it. After all, he had spent 2 years in the facility, and as a result, he knew everything about the institution of higher learning. And judging by the file he had received from Mirage, the target was living within officer housing at the Naval Academy. With a heavy sigh, Erich realized that he was being blackmailed to commit a murder on the grounds of a military facility. It was impossible to stress just how dangerous and foolish such a thing was. He could forget about smuggling a weapon through the tight security of the academy, as he would instantly be caught if he dared attempt something so stupid. Nor could he possibly storm the facility and eliminate the target in a coordinated shootout. If he even tried, security would gun him down before he could get past the academy's gates. No, there were only 2 ways to assassinate his target that Erich could think of, which were remotely likely to succeed. The first option was simply ridiculous, but if pulled off would very well achieve his goal of killing the target, as well as everyone else in a 25 kilometers radius. This plan required Erich to steal a heavy bomber that was armed with a tactical nuclear device, where he would then drop the damn thing on the academy from the atmosphere of the planet. Needless to say, there were way too many problems to list with why this plan would almost certainly result in his immediate demise. The only other option Erich could think of that would allow him to complete the task he was given was the most likely to succeed, but also had its own risks. And this was to rent out an apartment building which was normally used to house students off campus. If he did this, then he might be able to snipe the target through his window. Of course, this entirely relied on a matter of chance. I mean, what were the odds that a unit with a balcony and direct line of sight of Spectre's house was even available for rent? Still, this was his most likely chance of not only completing the job but also surviving the aftermath. If Erich did this, then he would first need to acquire a sniper rifle, one that was capable of piercing through the transparent metal which the Empire used as windows in most of its military and civilian structures. Which would mean he would need to get his hands on a long-range handheld railgun. And while he knew exactly where to purchase one of these weapons, it would take him a full month just to get there and back to Germania. His second obstacle would be that he would need to either rent a unit via the use of false information that had a direct line of sight to his target, or commit another felony in the form of breaking and entering, where he might be able to use someone else's apartment to pull off the assassination. Both of these options came with their own risks. For now, Erich decided to first get his railgun, along with the specialty munitions he would need to punch through his target's windows, and kill him with absolute certainty. Thus, he immediately set out for the outlaw outpost where he had initially acquired his armor and railgun pistol in the first place. 2 weeks passed before Erich finally arrived at the facility. This time, his landing was much smoother as his ship's information was registered in the outlaw database. Erich landed in the facility, while dressed in his makeshift power armor, before making his way to the weapons store, where he began examining different sniper rifles. The price tags on these things were insane. He was easily going to spend a minimum of 50,000 credits on one of these things, but that was a drop in the hat compared to what he would be making from the job. The store clerk could immediately tell that Erich was not exactly the most experienced man when it came to handling firearms, and was quick to approach him with an offer of assistance. Tell me what you are looking for, and what kind of firepower you need, and I will get you hooked up with the right gun for the job. Erich's face was concealed by his power armor's helmet, and thus, he did not bother hiding his intentions while he revealed what he needed and why. Assassination job. I have a high-value target in need of elimination, one who is protected in a military facility, with an officer housing to be precise. I need something which can be fired from a distance of under 1,000 meters and can punch a hole through whatever the hell it is that they make their windows out of. Erich could hear the man suck on his teeth as he heard the kind of job that Erich was trying to pull off and was quick to comment on the situation. That, my friend, is a tough one. Military housing is designed to be robust and immune to most forms of attack. But I might just have what you are looking for. I'm not going to lie, this weapon will cost you a pretty penny, as will the ammo that it fires, but I'm telling you it'll do the job just fine, and then some. Hold on, let me look in the back to see if I still have the damn thing in stock. After all, it is not every day that some cunt comes in here trying to assassinate a military officer. A few minutes later, the store clerk came back with a giant container in his hands. Erich seriously believed that the only way he was able to carry such a thing was with the exoskeleton which the store clerk wore. However, it took no effort for the man to unlatch the locks on the container before revealing a large bullpup railgun sniper. Unlike the revolver which Erich carried with him, this thing was clearly designed from the ground up to be a railgun, which meant it was highly illegal to possess as it was a military weapon from a more primitive era, one that should have been demilitarized decades ago. The man handed the sniper rifle to Erich, as if it weighed no more than a stick of cotton candy, to which Erich was surprised to see how light it was, and while Erich looked down its scope, he could hear the store clerk speaking to him about its features. We call this thing the Reaper. It fires an 8mm depleted uranium projectile at a velocity of roughly 5 km a second. So, unless your target is in a fucking tank, sayonara, baby. Now this bad boy is equipped with a MK262 autocorrecting optic, which means all you got to do is lock onto your target and pull the trigger. The gun will do the rest. Oh, and I should warn you, that thing has a fucking hair trigger on it. It will go off even after receiving the slightest bit of pressure, so be careful. Considering you said your target is under 1,000 meters away, I'm assuming you are going to be shooting this thing in an urban environment. So I should warn you in advance, when this thing goes off, everybody, and I mean everybody in a 5-kilometer radius, is going to hear it. So, my first bit of advice is to wear some proper ear protection, and second, the moment you confirm your kill, abandon this piece of hardware, and flee from the scene of your crime. Because after you shoot this thing just once, the authorities will be on your ass with a kill team in a matter of minutes. And in case you haven't noticed, this weapon is hardly what I would call concealable. Erich nodded his head in understanding as he posed the immediate question he had about the weapon. How much does this thing cost? The store clerk then chuckled before commenting on the high price tag that such a powerful and rare piece of military hardware commanded. These things don't exactly grow on trees, if you know what I mean. In fact, this is the last Reaper I've got in stock, and once it's gone, I won't be getting another. Like I said before, it is going to cost you a pretty penny. Erich shifted his gaze towards the store clerk and lowered his voice in a stern tone as he posed his question again. How much? The store clerk did not seem the slightest bit offended. In fact, he seemed rather happy that somebody was finally interested in this relic of a forgotten age, and finally voiced the price. For the weapon, the optic, and a magazine's worth of ammo, you are looking at 250k. And no, I am not going any lower than that. The trouble I had to go through to get my hands on one of these is worth at least that much. If I didn't have such a hard time selling this fucking beast, I would be charging you a premium. Are you interested or not? Erich was utterly astonished by the price tag of the weapon and immediately lashed out at the clerk over the idea of abandoning such an expensive piece of hardware. You are telling me, I have to pay you 250k for one shot of this thing, and then abandon it to the authorities? The fact that Erich had even asked this question proved to the clerk that he was indeed a novice when it came to jobs like this, and thus the man was quick to voice the consequences of not discarding the weapon after its use. Listen kid, I can tell you are new to this sort of thing, so allow me to inform you of what exactly will happen if the government's goons take you out. You do not get the sweet freedom of death like you might think. Oh no. You will wake up in the body of a clone in a fucking prison colony on some godforsaken asteroid, where you will spend the rest of your miserable life doing nothing but mining. So if you value your freedom like I do, I highly recommend you discard this weapon, or else you will find out just how painful a life of confinement really is. It physically pained Erich to spend such a vast amount of money on a weapon he would only be able to use once. And such a powerful one at that. But he had no choice. The man was right. Freedom was far more important than the 250k he would spend on this beast of a weapon. Thus, he begrudgingly paid the price for the weapon, optic, magazine, and a box of ammo, before stashing the weapon away in his ship's armory, where he then immediately headed for Germania. At this point in time, Erich was severely regretting ever accepting that damn smuggling job from Splinter, because now that they knew everything there was to know about him, he could no longer escape dangerous and highly illegal jobs like this. Rather, once he proved his worth by completing this mission, Splinter would continue to blackmail him into making use of his services. The very idea that he had gone from a special forces pilot to a drug smuggler, and finally a hitman for the mob, filled Erich with dread. After all, what would his beloved mother think if she were to find out that he was engaging in such horrendous crimes, and at such a young age too? Well, Erich immediately put these thoughts to the back of the mind, because they instantly made him bitter towards his father, who had, at least from his perspective, forced him onto this path of crime, which ultimately led to murdering a fellow military officer, even if the man really was a gangster behind the scenes. The new chapters on noveln.com. Chapter 43: Assassinating Spectre. Erich stood on the planet of Germania, while gazing up at an apartment complex, one which he would make use of to assassinate a fellow military officer on behalf of the interstellar crime syndicate known only as Splinter. He was dressed in a solid black flight suit, which acted as a base for the concealable body armor that he wore beneath some standard civilian clothes. On his head was a low-profile flight helmet, which was concealed by a large black hood. Currently in Erich's hands was the container which held the weapon he intended to use for his upcoming assassination. After taking a deep breath, he stepped forward and entered the apartment complex so naturally that it appeared that he actually lived there. After taking the elevator to the 9th floor, Erich stepped out into a long hallway, which was illuminated by a series of lights embedded in the roof. He then reached the door to the unit he had scouted out in advance and knocked on it 3 times. Since the moment Erich first appeared within the vicinity of the apartment complex, he had covertly sliced into its security network and put its camera feed on a loop. Thus, none of the cameras in the hallway were able to detect his presence, as he confirmed that the unit was currently empty. After knocking 3 times and waiting for an answer that never came, Erich effortlessly opened the door because he had already infiltrated the security system, allowing him to unlock any room within the building that he so desired. Once inside, he locked the door behind him and shut off all the lights which had instinctively lit themselves upon the entrance of the intruder. Just to make sure that nobody was home, Erich laid down the container which held his sniper rifle inside and proceeded to sweep through the building with his modified railgun revolver, before finally sighing in relief when he confirmed that nobody else was present. After which, he immediately opened the shades of one window in particular, where he began to set up his sniper rifle on a tripod so that it was facing the home of his target. In particular, a window which led directly into the man's dining room. Once Erich had confirmed that he was facing the correct house which his target was known to live in, he lied in wait for 3 hours before the man finally revealed himself. By now it was getting late, and while the faculty of the Naval Academy had returned to their homes, which were located on campus, the students were out socializing. Erich had stared down the sights of his optic for 3 whole hours without moving muscle until finally his target came into sight, and when he did, Erich suddenly lost the will to pull the trigger. The man who he was supposed to kill was none other than his old galactic politics teacher, Commander Werner Ekberg. The shock and dismay that Erich felt nearly overwhelmed him as he realized that one of his favorite teachers who had instructed him during his tenure at the Naval Academy was in reality a high-ranking member of an interstellar syndicate, and a rat at that. He stood there in disbelief and panic while the autocorrecting optic locked onto the man who had sat down at his dining table and began to sip a cup of coffee, which his wife had just brewed for him. Standing by his side was a beautiful Germanic woman, and several young kids who were no older than 10. They sat down at the dinner table beside their father and talked about the peaceful days that had just enjoyed. Tears began to stream down Erich's eyes as he struggled to do what was necessary. If he did not pull off this job, then he was effectively condemning himself to death. But if he pulled this trigger, he would be killing a man he respected, and in front of his loving family, no less. Just when Erich was about to pull his finger off of the trigger, the door to the apartment opened, revealing a young man, no older than 19, who stood in shock as he gazed upon the masked sniper who was about to kill a man. And when the door opened, Erich's trigger finger instinctively jerked it as a result of his nerves just enough that it pulled the trigger, and thus sent the 8mm depleted uranium projectile downrange and through the skull of his target, instantly killing the man in front of his family. The sound of the railgun's shot was deafening, even to Erich, who was wearing high-grade military hearing protection. It was so loud that the cadet who had entered the apartment fell to the ground and clutched his ears in agony, which were now bleeding from his perforated eardrums. It took Erich several seconds to realize what he had done, and when he did, his body instinctively took control over his mind and forced him to run away from the scene of his crime, which was no doubt having a government kill squad sent to its location at this very moment. The entire city block was acting like an atom bomb had gone off within its vicinity, as alarms were ringing across the area, and people had burst from their homes in search of the cause. Yet Erich was relying entirely on instinct at this point, and had used the survival evasion resistance and escape training to run from the authorities, which had drilled into his mind and muscle memory during his tenure at the Naval Academy. Within no more than 2 minutes Erich could see a shuttle approach the building where the shot had gone off, as heavily armored Star Marines entered into the apartment which he had used for his crime. Knowing that the government kill squad was already nearby, Erich skillfully dashed through alleyways and evaded even the slightest bit of detection, while his mind accessed the nearby security systems that every building had, and in doing so buried any trace that he was ever in the area. Eventually Erich made his way to the starport, where he was no longer being pursued by the government kill team. He had no idea how he had successfully evaded them and had no memory of what happened immediately after firing the shot. All he knew was that the moment he left the atmosphere and activated his quantum drive, that he was completely and utterly dead inside. Commander Wernick Egberg was a good man, an honorable man, one who had clearly been working with the IIS to infiltrate Splinter, where he had climbed through the ranks to the point where he was able to effectively bring down many of its operations. And Erich had just killed him in front of his family. The guilt which Erich felt inside at this moment was like a poison, which slowly gnawed away at his mind as he rapidly descended into madness. Just when he thought he was going to lose the last shred of his sanity, a notification appeared on his Neuralink, which revealed that he had received a substantial payment of 25 million credits and a request to meet up with his syndicate contact. At first Erich did not even want to think about meeting with that horrible woman. But, after several seconds of thought, he realized that more than anything he did not want to be alone to deal with his thoughts, and thus, he messaged her that he was inbound. Where he immediately headed back to the world of Quadi where she was waiting for him. By the time Erich arrived in Quadi, he smelled like a winery, having drunken multiple bottles of his Asuran palm wine. When he entered the bar, Miraj looked at his haggard appearance with a hint of pity in her scarlet eyes. After patting the seat next to her, indicating that she wanted Erich to sit beside her, she waited patiently until the man obeyed. Erich did as he was commanded, where immediately after the attractive young woman ordered for the bartender to bring the man a special drink. "Oh, Franz, bring my boy here some of the good stuff, and pronto." Immediately the bartender went into the back of the bar where he retrieved a solid vial of what appeared to be a white milky liquid. Erich had never seen this before, and thus slurred his words as he held it in his hands. EW updates tnvailby.com. Is this milk? Miraj did not say a word, instead she swiftly opened up the vial and stuffed it down Erich's mouth, while messaging his neck so that he was forced to swallow the entire shot in one go. Immediately Erich felt like the severely intoxicated state he was previously in had suddenly vanished, and was replaced with a burst of energy that was at the highest levels he had ever felt before in his life. Erich felt a need to either get into a fist fight with the first man he made eye contact with, or viciously fuck the first women he laid eyes upon. After seeing this intense reaction, Miraj giggled while responding to Erich's sudden burst of energy and aggression with a slight shake of her pretty head. Everybody has a different reaction when they first take vitality. Sit down, Erich, we have things to discuss. Contrary to what she was expecting, Erich did not do as she had instructed, and instead immediately grabbed hold of the cobalt-haired woman's chin and kissed her with intense passion, to which she responded by grabbing hold of her stun gun and shooting it straight into Erich's solar plexus, which dropped the man to his knees. Unlike what Erich had expected when he was forcibly kicked down from his intense high, the woman smiled before grabbing hold of Erich's chin, where she began to tease him with a seductive tone. "Easy there, tiger. If you still want to have some fun after we have concluded our business, then I am all for it, but I doubt your little girlfriend would approve of such a thing. So, now that you have come down from you high, sit down, we need to discuss some things." Erich did as he was instructed, but could immediately feel his negative emotions attacking his mental state, something which Miraj took notice of, and thus responded for perhaps the first time in her recent memory with a sympathetic tone in her alluring voice. "I know what you are probably thinking. You think that Spectre was a good and honest man, who was working with the authorities to bring down our little organization? Well, the good news is, none of that is true." Erich gazed over at Miraj with an astonished look, as he quickly spoke about his concerns regarding her statement. "But I knew Com." Before he could finish his sentence, Miraj placed her dainty index finger on his lips and shushed him while continuing her train of thought. "First off, when we speak about the man, we call him by his alias. Secondly, no, he was not working for the IIS. If he was, you can damn well believe we would have taken care of this delicate matter in-house. No, Spectre was a rival of my employer. He was not what he appeared to be to the public. Spectre was a filthy murderer, a drug peddler, a piece of shit sex trafficker, and a fucking rat. If that man was working for the IIS, he would have informed them about your little delivery so that you could be picked up on your way back. But instead he ratted you out to Vaxcovian customs, not because of some sense of honor or justice, but because he wanted to hurt my employer's operations. I won't bore you with the political structure of our organization. It is incredibly complex and quite dull, if I'm being honest. But there are some things that you should know. For example, working for every underboss is a gang of hardened criminals who are loyal to him. And these gangs are competing with one another for the favor of the man in charge of it all. So, you don't need to feel bad about what you did. Spectre had it coming, and by the way, in case you are still having doubts about what you just did, then you should know that the sick bastard sold his own 12-year-old daughter into slavery. I will leave what kind to your imagination, and yes, his bitch of a wife was in on it too. So cheer up, kid, you did an amazing job, and took out a real scumbag while you were at it. The galaxy is a better place for what you just did. I mean snipping the fucker from a cadet's apartment, with a fucking reaper no less? God damn, I wish I could have seen it. It's just a shame that the authorities now have their hands on such a fine piece of military hardware, but at least it got the job done. Although he did not know whether or not Mirage was making this whole story up for his benefit, or was actually telling the truth, Erich chose to believe it, because by believing this particular tale, he was able to live with his actions and even take a bit of pride in them. The only thing he regretted was that those kids would now be scarred for life after watching their dirtbag of a father get his head blown off in front of them. But, if that didn't harden them up for the harsh realities of the galaxy, then Erich did not know what would. Chapter 44 No Rest for the Wicked. Erich continued to stay in the bar and drink with Mirage for some time, as they chatted about the job that he had just pulled off. In fact, one of the things he was most curious about was how the cobalt-haired beauty had managed to prevent Spectre from being revived in a cloning facility, which he almost immediately asked about after she confirmed that the target of his assassination was well and truly diseased. Okay, I know that I sniped the target and took him out. I mean, even the nanites in his bloodstream could not have repaired that kind of damage, nor could a maid bay. But how did you prevent the guy from just reviving in a cloning facility? I mean, that's what happens, right? After we die, our memories are transplanted into the body of a clone. So how did you guys stop that? Mirage had a curious smile on her pretty face, as if she was debating internally about whether or not she should actually say something about this matter. Ultimately, after several moments of silence, she sighed heavily and chugged her beer in a matter of seconds, as Erich had witnessed her do several times before. Once she was done, she told Erich what he wanted to know. Alright, you remember how I told you before that I was once what the IIS refers to as being a watcher? Essentially, what this means is that I was born and bred to spy on the citizens of the Empire via the grid and their Neuralink systems. I'm going to be frank with you, there is a very small percentage of the population who knows this, so what I'm about to share with you does not leave this room. But, essentially, everything you do in life is recorded and stored in your Neuralink, literally everything. That's how it was so easy for me to find out about your little secret. By the way, I must say, you have an impressive physique for a man who was genetically modified at birth to be an ideal starfighter pilot, and not something like, say, a star marine. Anyway, the point I am trying to make is that a really good watcher, such as myself, is entirely capable of accessing that data storage. And believe it or not, I can do so much more. I'm talking about everything from managing your vitals to controlling your actual memories. Hell, I even have the ability to manipulate the biological functions of your body. If I really wanted to, I could slice into your Neuralink and make you cream your pants right now. Not that I would actually do that. So for someone like me, it was incredibly easy to slice into Spectre's Neuralink and disrupt the cloning signal from reaching its targeted destination. All that was left was for someone who is more capable of violence than I am to take him out. Which is where you came in. Erich looked in horror at the beautiful mutant woman who was smiling at him, as if the incredibly daunting news she had just told him was the most natural thing on the planet. He was amazed that someone with her abilities even existed and, as a result, was filled with so many questions, the first of which he could not help but ask. So you are telling me that Imperial intelligence just let someone as valuable as you slip from their fingers and enter the criminal underworld? Mirage scoffed at this remark before chugging another beer, where she immediately correcting Erich on his error. Of course not. Do you have any idea how difficult it was for me to flee from the clutches of the IIS? I was literally a slave, forced to do the bidding of the party, and spy on the citizens of the Empire all day, every day. Do you know how many people were punished for stupid shit because of my abilities? No, I had to fake my death and run away, which was not an easy task to pull off. Luckily, Butcher found me while I was all alone and hiding in some distant corner of the Empire. If it weren't for him, I'd be dead by now. Now I only spy on outlaws like yourself. And occasionally on a few celebrities I follow. You would not believe who has a crush on you, even if she is not willing to admit it yet. Erich neither knew nor cared who Mirage was referring to, and instead asked a far more important question that he had on his mind. So if the IIS has more people like you, then you are telling me that they could very easily find out about all the illegal shit I have been doing. If that's the case, then why aren't I already on the chopping block? Once more Mirage scoffed as she looked at Erich as if he were a bit full of himself before responding to the man in a conceited tone. Look at you, you managed to pull off 3 successful jobs in the underworld, and now you think you are some kind of big shot. Kid, they have much bigger fish to fry. In fact, I would not be surprised if a small-time thug like you hasn't even managed to appear on their radar yet. Which, by the way, let me fix that for you. After saying this, Mirage leaned in and kissed Erich, which greatly startled the man. He tried to pull himself away, but found that the woman had latched onto the back of his head quite tightly. She continued to kiss Erich for several seconds, and quite passionately at that before releasing him, where she then wiped the saliva from her lips before licking it in an incredibly seductive gesture. After doing so, she made a particularly suggestive comment in order to put the bewildered man at ease. "Damn, that little succubus of yours is quite the lucky woman. Oh relax, it is just a kiss. You have done far worse already. Consider yourself lucky that this was the only payment I asked for after what I just did for you. Because if you were single, I would have demanded that you to repay my services with that incredibly hot body of yours." This statement caused Erich to be filled with an overwhelming sense of dread. He even had to forcibly calm his hands from shaking, which he only managed to accomplish after Mirage grabbed hold of them with her own. Erich then looked straight into the woman's blood-red irises and asked the immediate question that was in his mind. "What the hell did you just do to me?" A seductive smile appeared on the woman's near-flawless face as she leaned in and whispered to him. "Now the only watcher who will be able to spy on you is yours truly. I look forward to watching your growth, Apex. And maybe after you have decided to stop fucking around with alien sluts and instead choose to finally embrace your own kind, we can have a little dalliance of our own. After all, wouldn't it be an incredibly exciting middle finger to the party if we conceived a little mutant of our own?" After saying this, Mirage got up and left the bar, leaving Erich in a state of astonishment. He did not know what he had done to get such a terrifying and beautiful woman to take an interest in him, but he supposed she was just incredibly loose, and this was merely his turn on the carousel. This was something he ultimately decided against pursuing. And instead Erich finished beer before heading back to his personal starship, where he planned to check out the housing market. Immediately upon sitting down in his bunk within the personal starship, Erich received a message from Eselet from her home world, where she appeared to have calmed down. It had been over a month since the last time they talked, and apparently she was quite worried he actually went on that trip with his friends, because she was quite flustered when she saw he was in what appeared to be a starship. Wiz 10-0, V, LB, I, N, for the best novel reading experience. Erich. You didn't really go on that trip, did you? Seeing how worried the girl was, Erich immediately grinned with a mischievous smile as he decided to play a prank on Eselet for storming out on him over something he had ultimately declined. After doing so, he dug up the old photo he had of him and Yumi before sending it to his girlfriend, all while leading her on about his current situation. "Oh yeah, it's been a blast. This is just one of many girls I recently hooked up with. I mean, after all, you did say that I should go on this vacation with the boys. If it was at all possible for the crimson skin of the Dvrakia race to pale with fright, then this most certainly happened to Eselet just before she broke out into tears and hung up on Erich. The act of which caught the man by surprise, who immediately called the woman back in an urgent bid to inform her that he was just messing with her. But Eselet did not respond, and because of this Erich sent the girl a direct message informing her of the truth, that he had not gone on the trip with Carl and the others, and had stayed behind in the Empire, where he was currently resting in his starship which for the time being was his only domicile. It took nearly 30 minutes for Eselet to call him back, and when she did, she was still visibly crying as she chewed Erich out for playing such a mean prank on her. "You bastard. I thought you were cheating on me. How could you be so cruel?" Though Erich felt like he had taken things a bit far, he was quick to remind Eselet that he wasn't the most cruel between the two of them. "Okay, I will admit, I may have got carried away with my prank, but you're the one who left me on block for the past month. Any reasonable guy would assume that you had broken up with him and moved on. The fact that I didn't really shows just how well I understand you. It's a shame that you just don't get my sense of humor." Erich then pretended to be offended, which caused Eselet to cry even more, as she revealed it was not her intention to keep him on block for so long. "It is not my fault. I wanted to contact you and apologize, but my parents are keeping a close eye on me. They received a report from another member of my unit that I have been too friendly with one of my Germanic co-workers. Because of this, they now think that I have been fraternizing with the enemy, and have placed me under total lockdown. In case you haven't realized, it has not been long since our two species fought a war with one another, and many of my people still see yours as invaders, conquerors, and murderers. My parents included. They stole my only means of contacting you. After all, we Dvrakias don't have implants which allow us to connect to the interstellar network with our minds." The implants that Eselet was referring to was in fact the nanites which were injected into Germanic citizens at birth, and was more commonly referred to by the term of Neuralink. The fact that she had called them implants showed just how little the Dvrakians knew about Germanic technology. Erich did not even stop to think that Eselet might have lost the means to contact him, and felt somewhat bad for being so defensive. While he did not outright apologize for his behavior, as he felt under the circumstances it was justified, he did come to an understanding with Eselet and inquire more about what she had been up to. "I understand. I did not even stop to think about what difficulties you might be going through now that you are back on your home world. After all, your entire civilization has been turned upside down as a result of our conquest, and I'm sure you must be struggling with where your loyalties are at. You said your parents have placed you under lockdown? You are not being treated as a prisoner, are you? Eselet, please tell me that everything is okay. There was a nervous look on Eseletha's face, and just when she was about to say something, she heard the sound of boots walking down the stairs, to which she immediately whispered in a voice so low Erich barely heard her. I have to go. It is no longer safe for us to chat, but I will contact you when I am next able to do so. But Erich, you should know that there are things are not as peaceful as they seem to be. There is a revolution brewing, and I think that outsiders are responsible for fanning the flames. Stay safe. After saying this, Eselet hung up the call, leaving Erich in a state of bewilderment. He could not understand what kind of trouble his girlfriend had gotten herself into, but he had an urge to immediately fly out to her homeworld and help her in any way that he could. However, before he could do so, he received a priority message from his squadron, calling for an immediate meeting on board their carrier. For whatever reason, he had been called back into service far sooner than he was supposed to. Whatever was happening, it was abundantly clear that another war with the Dvrakians was just around the corner. Chapter 45 Damsel in Distress. In order to avoid an all-out panic, the newly formed Dvrakia Social Republic had followed the same example as the leaders of the Germanic Star-Empire and had neglected to inform their population that a Nurku hive fleet was headed straight towards their borders. As a result of this, many Dvrakia loyalists, like Eseletha's parents, neither understood their government's cowardly actions, nor had they fully lost their will to fight against the aliens who they deemed to be nothing but murderous colonizers. The war had invoked something deep within the Dvrakia bloodline that had not been present for millennia. They were no longer a peaceful and spiritual people, instead many of the survivors now desired to drink the blood of their enemies, and there was no greater enemy to the Dvrakia people than the Germanic Star-Empire. On the world of Jaeger, a highly armed militia was camped out in a compound that used to be a large mansion which housed Eselet and her family. Eseletha's father was a former politician in the Dvrakia consortium, who, upon the announcement of his people's surrender, resigned from his position in protest. Now though, he was the leader of the Dictator resistance, which was one of many revolutionary groups which had popped up within Dvrakia space. He had invested a substantial sum of money into the reconstruction of his family's villa. It was no longer a simple mansion, but was now a military compound with a series of highly advanced bunker complexes. Where did he get the finances, weapons, and materials to build this place? From the Gimderi trade union, of course. As if blessed by the heavens, the various Dvrakia resistance movements now found themselves entirely funded, supplied, and trained either directly by the Golden Tooth cartel or via its proxies. Many of which were more adept at warfare than a race as physically pathetic as the Gimderi. Dieskova updated novels on n.o.v.elbian.go. However, just when Esverin Tavarian found that his plans were reaching fruition, he received a report from one of his agents who was embedded within the newly formed Dvrakia Republican Guard that his daughter had done the unthinkable and taken one of their filthy conquerors as a lover. Because of this, he reached out to Eselet and convinced her to return home after her leave had begun, where he immediately imprisoned the girl in the compound's break. Esverin could not believe that his own flesh and blood had betrayed their race in such a disgusting manner, and if not for the pleas of his wife, he would have killed his daughter on the spot just to restore the honor of his bloodline. Eselet never admitted to her deeds, but Esverin trusted his source, and thus, he would routinely torture the girl for lying to him. He wanted a name of who in his eyes she had whored herself out to. Specifically, because he wanted to personally bleed the man dry and feast on his flesh. By now, Esverin and many of his people had become the true devils that humanity once believed existed as a part of their mythos. They wanted their vengeance, and they would have it no matter what the cost. Even if they had to resort to some rather barbaric methods. Eselet was currently stripped naked and bound to the rafters. Her body was covered in bruises, and her tears had never stopped flowing since her discussion with Erich. Still, despite this, she did not dare say a word about who she was just talking to, because if she did, Erich would become the target of her father's vengeance. Esverin once more whipped Eseletha's heavenly figure with a laser whip, an act which scorched her crimson flesh, and left yet another burn mark upon. All the while, he demanded an answer to the question he had asked of her time and again. I want a name, Eselet. Who were you talking to? I deliberately allowed you to escape from your cell to find out who you were sleeping with. I know it was a German. Communications to those wretched fiends are the only ones that we can't track. You will tell me a name. Or I will end your miserable existence, no matter what your mother might have to say on the matter. Yet Eselet continued to bite her tongue while refusing to speak on the matter. No matter how much physical abuse she endured from her own father, she would never rat out Erich to the Dictatorian resistance. This only continued to infuriate Esverin, who was just about to lash the girl across her pretty face with his chain, when another member of his species entered the room. The man was dressed in a suit of power armor that, while not as advanced as the models used by the Germanic Star-Marines, was capable of providing adequate defenses against most Germanic weapons. In his hands was not a railgun, but instead a plasma rifle. It was abundantly clear to Eselet that her father's men were being supplied by outsiders, but she had no idea who. However, the next words the man spoke truly shocked her, as she was finally able to identify the culprit who was trying to cause another war between the Dvrakia race and the Germanic people. Commandant, the trade prince is on the line. He wishes to speak with you about our timetables. There was only one group of people in the galaxy who used the title of trade princes, and the moment Eselet heard this, she immediately chastised her father for his recklessness. Father, please don't tell me you have gotten into bed with the Gimderi. You know what they are like. They will bleed our worlds dry of their resources, and we will be left with nothing. Such a fate is so horrific that it would honestly be better to have the Germanic Star-Empire in control. At least they preserve the worlds which they live upon. While the Gimderi had done much to manipulate galactic society's opinion of themselves, specifically making it a taboo to speak ill of them, many races secretly spoke amongst themselves about how much they despised the goblinoids. After all, there was nothing to respect about a race of greedy, immoral bankers who used their power and influence to subvert and destroy every civilization that they came across. In the long history of the Gimderi race, they had been nomads without a home world, and throughout the millennia they had been expelled by 112 different civilizations who had all agreed that they were a subversive parasite that simply could not be tolerated in any capacity. Of course, they never looked towards themselves as the problem, rather, they blamed everyone else for being prejudiced against them. In fact, it was this exact failure to take responsibility for their actions and change that had led so many interstellar civilizations to despise the Gimderi race, even if they could only express such a sentiment while behind closed doors. Naturally, Esverin knew the truth about his new benefactors, but whether he was naive enough to believe that they would not be able to subvert and destroy the independent Dvrakia civilization he intended to create, or it was simply arrogance on his behalf, he chose to ignore his daughter's warnings, and instead whipped her across her face, and thus searing the flawless skin of the Dvrakia beauty, before scolding her for her words. I would rather be in debt to the Gimderi for eternity, than see those golden-haired fiends prey upon my own beloved daughter with impunity. You have brought dishonor to your family, and one day soon you will pay the price. Eselet did not say a word, instead all she wanted was to find a way to contact Erich, and alert him to this sudden and shocking information that she had just borne witness to. Erich was immediately called into the hangar of the carrier which he served upon. Standing by his side were the other members of his unit, while the wing commander had a grave expression on his face as he described the situation at hand. As of this moment, we are once more at war with the Dvrakia race, or should I say those separatist elements which have decided to take up arms against our great empire. At approximately 19 o'clock hours last night, an instructor at the Naval Academy was assassinated. Through means we do not yet understand, his neurolink was compromised, and his memory bank was wiped clean. To put it simply, Commander Vernik Egberg is dead, and he is not coming back. The IIS believes that the ones responsible were rogue units of the Dvrakia Republican Guard who had smuggled an obsolete piece of military hardware, and a dangerous one at that, out of one of our munitions depots, to a rebellious faction located on this planet, Jaeger. The Jaeger resistance is led by a former politician of the Dvrakia consortium by the name of Esverin Tavarian. He is, in fact, the father of one of the pilots who I know that at least one of you has personally trained. We do not know the extent of Ensign Eselet Tavarian's connection with the Jaeger resistance, but we know she is currently located in their compound. From what we understand, the Jaeger resistance, as well as many of the other rebellious factions, has been outfitted with some serious equipment from what we have determined to be a subgalactic power. However, we do not know the identity of this supplier, and because of this, we do not know the exact offensive capabilities that the Jaeger resistance now possesses. I won't lie to you. This mission will be dangerous, and the possibility of permanent death is likely, as the Jaeger resistance has somehow obtained the ability to tamper with our neurolink. So, I am looking for volunteers. All of you are more than welcome not to participate in this operation, but for those who do, there is at least a Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross in store for you. Your objective will be to fly and or protect a dropship to the world of Jaeger and, covertly, land outside the terrorists' compound. From there, a special forces team will infiltrate the facility and extract the targets. Which of course is none other than Ensign Eselet Tavarian and her father Esverin. Once safely aboard the dropship, you will return to the fleet. The moment that Eselet and her father are back on the carrier, they will immediately be sequestered for interrogation, where we will learn about the identity of their supplier, how they managed to slice into our neurolink, the extent of their terrorism network, and any assets they may have embedded in the Imperial Navy. I will reiterate, the compound is protected by weapons provided by an unknown subgalactic power. If you are detected and targeted, the chances of suffering a permanent death are astronomical. So, do I have any volunteers? There was only one man who dared to raise his hand, and that was Erich. There were two reasons that Erich had volunteered for this mission, despite the alleged risks involved with it. 1. He knew for a fact that it was not the Thekaria resistance which had killed Commander Vernick Egberg, and 2. He had already planned to rescue Eselith himself, and now that he was fully aware of the danger she was in, he would stop at nothing to save her from her own father, and exonerate her of any criminal charges that might be brought against her. Commander Erwin Wolf sighed heavily as he realized that he only had one volunteer. He was hoping for a proper armed escort, but since the rest of his unit were either unwilling or simply too scared to commit to the operation, he was forced to salute Erich with the utmost respect, before sending the man on his way. Silber, it figures that you would be the one to volunteer for such a suicidal mission. Alright, very well, I hope you know how to pilot a dropship, because one wrong move and you are as good as dead. Everyone else, dismissed. With this said, Erich quickly attached his helmet and entered the dropship, which already had the Special Forces team on board waiting for the operation to begin. He did not hesitate to request clearance for takeoff before piloting the vessel towards the world of Jaeger. Chapter 46 Saving Ensign Eselith. By the time the dropship came out of Quantum, Erich's heart was beating so rapidly that he believed he might actually suffer a heart attack. Eselith was in trouble, and the last communication he had with her clearly suggested that she was being held prisoner by her father, who was a hardline separatist. It had been less than a year since the war with the Dvrakia consortium had ended and already many of the conquered people were kicking up a fuss. I mean, starting a revolution to tear away from the Germanic Star-Empire? After such a horrific loss? What madness had compelled them to do something so foolish? In truth, the Germanic Star-Empire treated their new Dvrakia subjects quite fairly, more so than any other interstellar civilization thought they would. Though the public did not know it, the Germans needed the Dvrakians to aid in their war effort against a monumental threat which was rapidly approaching their borders. Because of this, the Germanic Star-Empire allowed the newly formed Dvrakia Social Republic to maintain quite a bit of sovereignty over its internal matters, even more so than their previous suzerains. What the Germanic authorities had interfered with was the reconstruction of the Dvrakia worlds, the Dvrakia military, and the governing body of the Dvrakia people. After all, they were going to be facing an extinction-level threat in just a handful of years, and because of this, the Dvrakians needed to be rebuilt into something that could withstand a Narku high fleet. Having a democratic and pacifistic government, when such an overwhelming threat loomed on the horizon, was just asking for disaster. Naturally, the reasons behind these decisions weren't made public, but it was not like the Dvrakians were facing any serious form of oppression or discrimination by the new government. Aside from mandatory military conscription, which was happening in the Germanic Star-Empire as well, the people were left to their own devices, and the GSE had been paying out of their own to rebuild what they had previously destroyed. With all these things in mind, Erich could not understand why so many Dvrakians were willing to take up arms once more, especially after the humiliating and devastating loss they had recently suffered. There was only one thing he could think of, and it was exactly as Eselith had tried to warn him about. Some third party was interfering in matters they had no business sticking their nose into. These were the thoughts that flooded through Erich's mind as he skillfully piloted the dropship to the marked location on his nav computer. As he approached the world's surface, Erich activated the dropship's stealth capabilities, which not only concealed their position from advanced sensor technology, but also managed to cloak the appearance of the ship to match its surroundings. This was a specially modified dropship intended for use by special operations, and because of this, it was outfitted with such advanced and expensive features. In fact, the Germanic Star-Empire's premier military technology was even capable of confusing the sensors that most tier I subgalactic powers made use of. Thus, Erich was praying to whatever deity may exist within this universe that the Dvrakia separatists did not pick up his position, because if they did, he would be shot out of the sky in an instant. Luckily, a combination of the stealth technology and the Germanic Star-Empire's jamming technology managed to buy him enough time to land the ship in the drop zone, where the side hatches of the spacecraft opened up to deploy 5 whole fire teams of some 25 special operations soldiers who were recruited from among the most talented and capable Star Marines to undertake the Empire's most covered and dangerous operations. All Erich could do now was wait for the mission to succeed, or for the command to abort, and flee from the hostile area. Esverin was in the middle of a call with the Gimderi trade prince Pixel Goldentooth, while unknown to his entire compound, 5 fire teams of Germanic Special Forces, known by the name of Storm Commandos, were rapidly approaching his position. The short and obese goblinoid had a scowl on his hideous face as he picked at his sharp and gilded teeth with his grubby little fingers. He was clearly displeased with something, but Esverin did not know what. At least not until he finally spoke. My spies report that you have taken the liberty to assassinate an officer within the Germanic Navy. May I ask why, out of all your possible targets, you killed a school teacher? The leader of the Dvrakia separatists gawked at Pixel with a look of pure ignorance on his face. And this was all that the Gimderi trade prince needed to know that a trap had been set against his newest pawns. He was just about to warn Esverin when the sound of combat echoed throughout the compound. Esverin quickly looked to the doorway where one of his soldiers entered into the room. His weapon had been discarded, while his armor and flesh were covered in scorch marks. One of his wings had been entirely incinerated, and half of his face was burnt beyond recognition. "Commandant. I don't know how, but the Germans have found us. They are here in the compound." After hearing this, a flash of crimson light blinded Esverin temporarily while the man in front of him turned completely into ash. A look of complete and total rage appeared on Bixel's face as he began to curse out loud in a particularly disgusting voice. "The myth. Those clever bastards. They set you up. Well, it looks like this is where we part ways. Goodbye, Commandant." After saying this, the communication was cut, and the holographic projection of the obese and hideous goblinoid vanished just in time for the Germanic Storm Commandos to enter the room, where they quickly relayed their information to Erich, who was practically dying of anxiety while waiting for news about Esilith. "We have secured Esverin, but no sign of the bastard's daughter." As for the man in question, Esverin immediately assumed that his daughter had called for support from the Empire, and began to curse her name in fury, and in doing so exonerating her of the charges she would otherwise be facing. Alwest chptrs on in.o.vlin. cm. That filthy race traitor of a whore. She has betrayed me. I knew I should have killed her the moment she stepped foot in my home. Naturally, this statement was recorded and sent back to Germanic High Command, who were watching a live stream of the entire combat operation from the perspective of the Germanic Storm Commandos' helmet cams. Esverin was quickly extracted, while combat continued to ring out from the compound. It had even reached the subterranean bunker complex where Esilith was currently hanging from the rafters. Her entire body was scorched black from the burns of her father's laser whip, and her face was barely recognizable. If not for the ID tag the Germanic Star-Empire inserted into her hand, her rescuers would not easily be able to identify her. It took all the energy in the woman's body for her to look up and scream for help in the Germanic tongue. Her voice was hoarse and raspy, as if she had not been permitted to drink for days. But it was just audible enough to attract the Storm Commandos who were rapidly advancing through the facility, and killing any Dvarakia they came across who was not a female. "Help! Please! Help me!" Esilith witnessed a flash of red light outside the door, before it finally opened to reveal two piles of ash, and a man standing in the doorway, dressed in solid black power armor. If one could see his expression behind his tinted visor, it would be one of horror, as he quickly scanned Esilith's body not only for information on her vital signs but also on her identity, which he confirmed to be the target he was looking for. The man quickly found something to cover Esilith's scorched and naked body with, as he cut her out of her chains before lifting her up and carrying her out of the facility. Though Esilith could not see the man's face, she was delirious enough to assume it was her lover, and as she was just about to pass out from exhaustion, she made the mistake of saying his name. Erich. Chapter 35 Returning to Active Service. Erich took a deep breath as he aimed his railgun revolver towards his hostages. Naturally his finger was off the trigger, as he was thoroughly trained in the use of firearms during his tenure in the Germanic Youth Corps, and later during his time at the Naval Academy. The last thing he needed was to cause a negligent discharge and alert the entire spaceport to his hostage crisis. The 5 customs security officers remained kneeling on the ground with their arms behind their head as they eyed the security cameras, as if waiting for the starport's crisis team to respond. When Erich noticed this, he chuckled before informing the 5 men that their hopes were in vain. "I hate to break it to you guys, but reinforcements are not arriving. It was quite easy for me to slice into your security network and put those cameras on repeat. As far as anyone knows, you are still investigating my starship." Upon hearing this grave news, the hearts of the hostages nearly imploded. When they were tipped off about a potential drug smuggling ring, they did not expect things to end so poorly. They could only sigh and lament their lot in life as they waited for their fate to unfold. Shortly thereafter Erich could hear the elevator functioning, and though the Vaxkovians appeared hopeful that their saviors had arrived, the moment the doors opened they were filled with even further despair, as a group of fellow Vaxkovians appeared on the scene. However, they were not dressed in security uniforms, but rather civilian clothes, with masks concealing their features. When they rushed into the hangar, these thugs drew their pistols which were concealed in their jackets, where they then approached the ship, while the leader of the unit spoke with Erich directly in the Germanic language. "The Glymex gang thanks you for your efforts. Do not fret, now that we have the cargo, the payment is already being transferred to Splinter as we speak. You did good, not many smugglers could handle a sudden search and seizure this well. We'll take it from here." Erich sighed in relief as he lowered his railgun revolver and placed it in its holster after decocking its hammer. All the anxiety he felt prior to this moment suddenly disappeared, and instead a wide smile formed on his handsome face, though it was obscured by the tinted visor that his helmet made use of. Just when he was about to express his gratitude, the gangster in charge attached a suppressor to his pistol, before shooting the leader of the Vaxcovian security agents, point blank in the head. Erich had not expected that the gang who he was smuggling drugs to would outright execute his hostages, and he was quick to scream out at them in disbelief. "What the fuck are you doing?" The gangster simply snorted in disdain as the rest of the Vaxcovian security officers ran for their lives. However, they did not make it far, as the gangsters ceased their actions and aimed their handguns at the hostages' backs before pulling the triggers, and thus sending all the remaining hostages straight to the afterlife. After doing so, he responded to Erich's question with a cold tone in his voice. "No witnesses." Erich could not believe his eyes. The murders had happened so quickly that he had not been able to intervene. Instead he fell to his knees, knowing that he was responsible for the deaths of 5 innocent security officers who were just doing their job. When he entered the criminal underworld, Erich had justified the murders that Drake and his crew committed, because they were Germanic citizens, and criminals no less, who were well within the range of cloning facilities. Those men had revived, and were most likely currently facing prison stints for the list of charges they were no doubt wanted for. But clearly the Vaxcovians did not have the technology to bring their dead back to life, and thus, the 5 men who were murdered just now were well and truly dead. Killing in war was one thing, after all, it was a fight for Erich's survival. It was him, or the enemy, but to witness the outright murder of several security officers happen in front of him, which was undoubtedly his own fault. Erich felt a part of him die inside and realized immediately that he was not cut out for the cutthroat business of drug smuggling. The lead gangster could sense Erich's despair, and thus he pointed his pistol towards Erich's head, before asking one simple question. One which undoubtedly would determine whether Erich would live or die. "Are we going to have a problem?" Realizing that he might die without the chance of resurrection in a cloning facility due to the distance between him and the Empire's network, Erich quickly shook his head, before climbing to his feet while finding his resolve to stomach this heinous crime that was undoubtedly a result of his own actions. After seeing that Erich was being cooperative, the gangster chuckled before stashing away his pistol. He then ordered his crew to put the bodies in Erich's cargo bay once all the contraband had been successfully transferred into their hands, where he gave one last bit of advice to Erich, who was struggling to keep his shit together. "When you enter FTL, you should dump those bodies out of your cargo hold. Trust me, nobody will ever find them that way. Oh, and one last thing, I don't believe I need to remind you that we were never here." After saying this, the Glymex gang departed with the drugs, which they would no doubt distribute across Vaxcovian space. As for Erich, he climbed into his ship and took off with lifeless eyes. It took everything he had to properly dispose of the bodies which lie in his cargo bay without having a mental breakdown. No longer feeling up for a vacation on the beach, Erich immediately began to head back to the industrial world of Quadi, where he spent as much time as possible cleaning off the bloodstains from his cargo hold. Another month passed, and before Erich knew it, he was already back in Imperial space. The memories of what he had done on Vaxcovia had never left his mind. Only the mass quantity of Asuran palm wine which he kept in his ship could help him tolerate the guilt that ate away at his stomach. When he finally pulled into Quadi's orbit, he spoke to himself in a depressed voice. "All test novel on novel bin. CM. It wasn't supposed to be this way." Despite the internal conflict that he was currently suffering from, Erich knew that he needed to put on his game face, or else when he re-entered active duty within the next 3 days, his fellow pilots would realize that something had happened, and he would undoubtedly be investigated. Thus, Erich forced himself to appear stoic, knowing that his freedom depended on it. The next 3 days were difficult to get through, as Erich primarily stayed within the confines of his starship, drinking wine to cope with the many disturbing emotions he felt at this moment. In the end, he stashed his ship away for long-term storage, before heading back to the carrier which he served on. It had only been 4 months since he was last fighting in Thrakia space, and yet, he felt as if a lifetime had passed. His brief foray into the criminal underworld, while exciting at first, had ended with a bloody mess. Something which even now he endured a tremendous amount of guilt over. Meanwhile, the war against the Thrakia consortium was quickly approaching its end. Something which Erich was immediately reminded of when he met up with his unit. Commander Erwin Wolf, who was in charge of the squadron, gazed upon the pilots of the Black Sun, and smiled before welcoming them back to service. "It is good to see all of us together again. Now, as many of you already know, the war is rapidly nearing its end, and all that is left is to lay siege to the Thrakia homeworld. Thus we will immediately be deploying to the front lines to lead the charge against the enemy. Silber, you'll be glad to know that your interceptor has been replaced, though I would feel remiss if I did not remind you to take it easy on the steams, and that goes for the rest of you adrenaline junkies as well, understood?" Erich, along with the other pilots who had crashed as a result of overdosing on stimulants, immediately saluted their wing commander and responded in the affirmative. Yes, sir. With this said, Commander Wolf smiled once more before giving out his orders to his unit. All right, well, now I want you fuckers ready for combat at a moment's notice. You all received a minimum of 4 months as leave, and the last thing I need is for you to get complacent. So, over the next few weeks, as we approach the front lines, I want you guys running combat drills on the regular. That's all for now. Dismissed. Erich followed the rest of his fellow pilots back to the bunks, where he stashed away his gear. Undoubtedly there would be another illegal card game tonight, but by now Erich had received his fill of unlawful activity, and decided to just get as much rest as possible before he was once more thrust into combat. Chapter 47 Narrowly Avoiding an Execution. Erich was entirely astonished that the Grand Admiral even knew who he was, let alone wanted to speak with him. He instinctively followed the man's commands as he took his seat, while waiting for Alaric to speak his mind. Which came quicker than he thought it would. You have been quite busy, Erich. As a mere cadet, you managed to succeed where nobody else had been able to do so. After nearly 4 centuries, you alone found a way to eliminate the Narku hive fleet within a scenario that was designed to be unwinnable. With such a rare talent, I must admit that I immediately took an interest in you, and may have covered for your actions when it was revealed that you had a little dalliance with the aunt of the Oni Emperor. No matter how much the Supreme Leader wanted your head on a pike, I pulled several favors to ensure that did not happen. Then I organized a starfighter tournament to give you a bit of breathing room after your parents had disowned you for your crimes against the Empire. And you exceeded my expectations once again. After your graduation from the Naval Academy, I had you assigned to the Black Sun Squadron, where you proved to be an invaluable asset in the war against the Dvrakians. I must say, I have been rather impressed with your service record thus far. Now imagine my surprise, when after getting your first taste of freedom, you immediately enter the criminal underworld. Though I did not cover for the crimes you committed, they were not serious enough for me to expend the resources to bring you to justice. That is until Splinter hired you to do their dirty work. EWW UPDTs on novlbi.com. Assassinating a commander in the Imperial Navy? Now that is a serious crime. Even if he was a crooked bastard who worked for the syndicate and sold his own daughter into slavery, such a thing does not excuse your sins. Oh, I can see on your face exactly what you are thinking. How do I know about all of this? Is that correct? Erich was truly bewildered at this moment, to the point where he struggled to find words to speak, and thus he just silently nodded his head with a gawking expression on his face. Immediately afterward, the Grand Admiral smiled before admitting to a vast conspiracy that Erich never thought he would hear in his life. That is because Splinter works for us. Shocking, isn't it? You might be wondering why the government is in league with an interstellar crime syndicate? Well, try as we might, we have found it entirely impossible to completely eliminate crime. It is something in our blood that we inherited from our ancestors that just won't go away. So, what were we to do when the technology exists to freely traverse the stars and commit any number of heinous acts? Well, we looked to the most brutal and organized criminal syndicate that we could find and bound them to our leash. This way, they can control the criminal underworld on our behalf and ensure that the only crimes that happen within the borders of the Empire are non-violent offenses. So that the people may live their lives without fear of a random acts of violence from no good rotten criminals. Naturally, we were all aware of what Spectre was up to, and though I personally disapproved of his actions, it was not severe enough for me to intervene. That wasn't until he decided to risk everything we have built together by informing the authorities in a bordering civilization about your activities. Naturally, something needed to be done about that, and it just so happened to have occurred right at the same time that we just so happened to have learned that several groups of Dvrakia separatists had begun popping up across our newly conquered territory. If we were to unjustly crack down upon the Dvrakia Social Republic and its citizens, that would only aid in the separatists' recruitment efforts. But if they were to assassinate an officer in the Imperial Navy? And in doing so, give him a death that was permanent. Then we would have every right to begin kicking down doors of suspected terrorists, and the public would not even bat an eye. So, I ordered Spectre to covertly pull off the assassination of a man who I have long since detested for a number of reasons, so that I could blame it on the Dvrakia separatists. Not only did this give us a proper justification to crack down on these rebels, but it was also a way to remind those pathetic outlaws who are really in charge. If they were to ever cause unnecessary trouble for me again, I could reveal their part in the assassination of a military officer, and thus really make their lives quite miserable. Of course, I did not expect that they would beat me at my own game and use you as their sacrificial lamb. Butcher is an incredibly brilliant man, one who despises the Empire and its government. Not that I blame him. After what we did to him and his family, he has every right to be angry at us. You are probably wondering right about now, why would I possibly be revealing all of this to you? Well, you see, as promising as a talent as you have been so far, you have just about used up all of my patience. I have it on good authority that even after being disowned by your parents for having an affair with that Oni girl, you have still not learned your lesson and are now once more engaged in a rather serious relationship with a Dvarakia woman. As much as I do not care for the Empire's mistreatment of mutants such as yourself, or our ridiculous laws on interspecies relationships, especially those that can't possibly result in a pregnancy like the one you have with Ensign Eselet, there are trillions of people in this empire who do. And you have already blown your cover twice now. There are already people who are asking questions about your relationship with this woman, and try as I might to bury the evidence of what you have done, our doctors know enough now about Dvarakia's social customs and mating habits to understand what you have done. I mean, you are aware that a standard medbay can detect any and all damage done to the body, and can repair even that if requested. As difficult as it might be, I can still make this situation disappear, but this is your last chance. So now you have two options. You can either break up with your little girlfriend and stay away from alien women for the rest of your life. Or, I can ensure that the medbay she is currently recuperating in suffers a little glitch. If that were to happen, then I'm afraid due to the severity of her injuries, she would not make it. Either way, your relationship with the little succubus ends today. It just depends on how you want it to end. So, what will it be, Erich? Having heard everything that the Grand Admiral had to say, it took Erich some time to process all the information that had received in this brief scolding. Whether it was the fact that the Grand Admiral himself had mapped out Erich's career, or the fact that Mirage and Splinter had offered him up as a sacrificial lumber in a power play against the Empire. Erich did not actually care about either of these things. Instead, his mind was drawn to one particular issue, the fact that he would have to break up with Eselet, a woman he had grown to love, once and for all. If that were to happen, then most likely she would be transferred to another carrier in the fleet, and the two of them would never speak with one another again. Though perhaps this might actually be for the best. After all, because they were from two vastly different humanoid species, they would never be able to have children together. Not only that, but with Esverin in custody, and all of his soldiers dead, nobody would ever know that Eselet had ever had sexual relations with an outsider, especially after the medbay repaired every bit of damage that her body had ever received. Meaning that she could eventually move on from him and marry a member of her own race like she was supposed to. Even if their brief time together as a couple had unnaturally to come to its end, and by his own hand no less, at least Eselet would still be alive. With this in mind, and after several moments of silence, Erich finally sighed and nodded his head. He struggled to hold back the tears in his eyes as he agreed to the Grand Admiral's decision. Very well. The moment she wakes up, I will inform her that we can no longer be together. After an event like this, I am certain that I can spin a tale about it being in her best interest to never see me again. I am thankful that you are giving me another chance to live even after everything that I have done, and I promise never to interact with Splinter ever again. Despite agreeing to the Grand Admiral's conditions, Erich felt like he had somehow lost everything. He was in a worse state than when his parents had disowned him. Once again, he was all alone in the universe, and the galaxy was a vast and lonely place. However, Alaric's next words took Erich by surprise. That last part won't be necessary. Though you were a sacrificial lamb, I must admit you have somehow gotten into Splinter's good graces. This presents a rather unique opportunity for the both of us. You see, it has been extremely difficult for me to get a man on the inside until now. Naturally, you know where I am going with this. So, from now on, you are my agent on the inside. The next time Splinter decides to contact you, you will accept whatever job they offer, and inform the IIS of everything you speak about. You can consider this to be your redemption as a citizen of the Empire. Do this for me, and perhaps one day, you might have that which your heart desires most of all. You are dismissed, Lieutenant, or should I say, Lieutenant Commander. Oh, don't look at me like that. I may have forced you to break up with your little girlfriend, but I am not entirely hurtless. As far as I am concerned, you have already proved yourself more than worthy of a promotion during the war with the Dvrakians. And if it weren't for that damned fool in charge of your ship holding a silly little grudge, you would have already been promoted by now. When you return to your ship, you can also expect to find a knight's cross with swords and oak leaves in your cot. Consider these two gifts back pay for everything that you have done during your military service thus far. This is your last chance to fall in line. So, the next time I hear about you behaving in a way that dishonors your position, I will have you arrested. After hearing this, Erich was escorted out of the Grand Admiral's office, and back to the shuttle, where he would then be taken to the 13th Fleet and the carrier he served upon. It would take several days for Eselet to recover from her injured state, and during this time Erich would think of the best way to break up with her, in a way that made it so she would never wish to contact him again. Chapter 48. Which side are you on? It took 2 whole weeks for the damage that was done to Esilith's body to be fully repaired, and when she was finally permitted to exit the medbay and the clinic on board the carrier, she immediately found that her world had been turned upside down. After meeting with Erich in their secret hiding spot, the man was cold and distant, which was shocking considering the dire situation Esilith had been in over the last 2 weeks. Just when she was about to ask what was wrong with him, Erich spoke, and in doing so, shattered the young woman's world. Esilith, I'm afraid it is too dangerous for us to be together. What happened to you was entirely my fault, and I can't allow something so horrible to occur ever again. I am afraid that I have no choice but to break up with you. At first Esilith thought that perhaps Erich was joking, and giggled as she patted the man on the back before trying to kiss him. However, he quickly dodged the attempt, and put some distance between himself and the woman he had fallen for. Esilith began to look at Erich differently after that, and immediately asked the question that suddenly came to her mind. You are serious, aren't you? Erich, you can't do this. I have lost everything. My entire family is dead because they have sided against the Empire. You are the only person that I have left in my life. Please don't abandon me. However, Erich simply sighed and walked away. Though Esilith could not see it, there was a single tear that had managed to get past his defenses and found itself trailing down the edge of his nose. All the while, he said his last goodbyes. I'm sorry, Esilith. It is better for the both of us this way. Pretend like I never existed and find yourself a proper Dvarakia man to have a family with. After saying this, Erich left the room, much to the astonishment of Esilith, who, after realizing this was indeed her reality, collapsed to her knees and broke out into tears. Erich, however, did not make it far into the hallway, as he fell to the floor and gripped his chest in agony. There was no physical pain. After all, it was not like he was having a heart attack. And yet his beating heart felt as if it had suddenly imploded, leaving nothing but a black hole in his chest. Like Esilith, he now had nobody left in his life who cared for him. Perhaps Erich could turn to his friends in his hour of need, but at a time like this, they were nowhere to be found. Instead, the man was forced to return to his bunk, where he collapsed inside of his cot and passed out from emotional exhaustion. By the time Erich awoke on the next day, he found that Esilith had been transferred to another unit, just like he had expected she would be. The likelihood of the two of them ever speaking again was improbable, to say the least. Especially now that the Grand Admiral was keeping a close eye on him. With his emergency mission completed, Erich now found himself back on leave. And thus, he had an enormous amount of free time on his hands. But life seemed to have lost its purpose without Esilith by his side, and rather than go out and search for a home for the two of them to call their own like he had initially intended prior to breaking up with the woman, Erich instead found himself in the bar that Mirage so commonly visited. Perhaps he had instinctively come to this bar in search of the cobalt-haired beauty. But she was nowhere to be found, and because of this, Erich simply spent his time drinking his sorrows away. He did not know how many hours had passed, or how many drinks he had purchased, but eventually he smelled like a brewery, and could barely keep his head off the counter. It was at this moment that somebody sat down next to him, and much to Erich's joy, it was indeed Mirage. She looked at the man with a look of utter pity on her otherwise flawless face. After sitting down next to Erich, Mirage ordered another hit of what she referred to as vitality, which was a powerful drug, one capable of countering the intoxication that Erich currently was suffering from. Although this time Erich knew exactly what Mirage was trying to do, and quickly rejected the woman, whilst slurring his words as he did so. No way. I done wanna. Upon seeing that Erich was refusing her offer, Mirage did the unthinkable, and took the shot of the milky white liquid into her mouth, before kissing Erich. As she did this, Mirage had force-fed Erich the drug, which had an immediate effect on his mind. Clarity rapidly returned to Erich's mind, causing him to come to the sudden realization that he was kissing Mirage. After having just broken up with Esilith, Erich immediately felt guilty about kissing another woman so soon, especially since his heart still only cared for the Crimson Demoness, and thus, he rather violently forced himself away from Mirage. Despite his actions, the cobalt-haired beauty did not appear angry. Instead, she had an expression of sympathy as she spoke to Erich. I heard about what happened. I'm sorry that you were forced to break up with your girlfriend. But unfortunately for you, that was bound to happen sooner or later. The government has their eyes and ears everywhere. It was only a matter of time before they discovered your relationship with Esilith. But, unfortunately for you, we now have something very awkward to discuss because of this little incident. We know that Emeries has asked you to spy on us. Oh come on now, Erich, don't look at me like that. The Grand Admiral isn't the only one who has been watching your every move. Perhaps if the IIS knew that their most talented watcher was in fact alive and currently working for Splinter, then they would have taken some precautions to hide the contents of that meeting from us. The question now is, where do your loyalties lie? Are you really going to go back to being the lapdog of a government that couldn't care less if you existed? Erich did not immediately respond to Miraj's question and simply looked away, an act which caused the woman to sigh before ordering another round of drinks for the two of them. She then posed a question that Erich never thought he would hear in his life. Erich, come work for us, and I don't mean as a mere pawn or a sacrificial lamb like before. You may not realize it now, but you are in a unique position to actually do some good for our people. For mutants? I don't know how, but you have managed to gain the Grand Admiral's trust, and in case you haven't been paying attention to these last couple of years, Emery's is now effectively in control of the Empire. As I said before, we know that Emery's has asked you to spy on us, to which we have a counteroffer. We want you to become our double agent. Erich, with your help, Splinter has the potential to evolve into something more than just a criminal syndicate. We could become the change that the Empire so desperately needs. Allow me to give you a fair warning. If you continue on your current path and maintain your position as the Empire's lapdog, you will get everything you want out of life. You will become a war hero and will be loved by the people. So much so that the Empire will grant you an exception and give you a wife. In a few years, you will probably have family of your own, and everything will be hunky-dory. And then do you know what happens after that? Erich gazed at Miraj with a cautious glint in his eyes. He did not know where this conversation was headed, but so far, the warning she was supposed to be giving him actually did not sound all that bad. That is until Miraj spoke her next words. Eventually there will come a time when you become a thorn in the Empire's side, and when that happens, they will take your family from you and throw you to the wolves. Just like they did to Butcher. A mutant can only go so far in our current society before those in power become jealous and begin to tear him down. I really shouldn't be saying this, but you need to know the truth of what happens to people like us, especially those who dare to challenge the status quo. Butcher was once a starfighter pilot like yourself, a very talented one. In fact, to this day, he holds the record for the largest number of confirmed kills, and is considered to be the Empire's greatest ace. He was so good that he was even given a wife, which he was happy to start family with. And when he retired from the Navy, he began to climb the political ladder. But as I said before, our current society would never allow a mutant like him to climb to the very top. After all, if such a thing were to occur, the very fabric of the Empire would come unraveled. So they gave him an ultimatum to toe the party line, or suffer the consequences. Naturally, Butcher refused, because just like you, he wanted to make the Empire a better place for mutants like himself. And do you know what the party did? They killed his family, and then of course they tried to kill him too, but he survived, barely. Erich was astonished to hear this story, because from his memory, there was only one mutant who had ever been granted permission to get married and have a family. And that man had been the source of strength that Erich looked to when he was first disowned by his parents. Naturally, Erich was curious to hear the rest of the story, which he was quick to ask about. And what happened then? What did Butcher do after his family was killed by the party? Just when Miraj was about to speak, a very masculine and gruff voice interrupted her from another part of the bar, where a man with crimson red hair and eyes was sitting alone while drinking. Well, he dedicated his life to bringing down the bastards who had murdered his family. But the party is quite insulated, and they have more than a few ways to revive, no matter how hard you might try to kill them. So, he eventually gave up and turned to a life of crime, where he became an underboss in the Empire's largest and most fearsome syndicate. That is, until he heard of a young man like himself, who just so happened to catch the eye of the man who is currently in power. Miraj's expression immediately shifted one to intense dread as she slowly looked over and saw her employer staring menacingly at the two of them. She could barely find the words to apologize for speaking about his past without his permission. Boss. I'm sorry I didn't. However, before she could finish, the man raised his hand to silence her, which worked like a charm, before he grabbed the drink out of her hand and downed it quicker than she was capable of doing herself. Once the beer was gone, Butcher tossed the glass across the room, causing it to shatter on another wall, where he then sat down next to Erich and wrapped his arm around the man's back. Don't worry about it, sweetheart, like you said, the kid needs to know the truth. While it is true that Splinter is the most vicious syndicate in the Empire, you should know that it is mostly filled with mutants like the three of us, many of which are just looking for a place in society to call their own. For the first time since the formation of our little organization, we now have a chance to make some serious changes in society, and it all revolves around you, kid. You may not be aware of this, but the leaders of the party are gone. The cowards fled to the Alfheim Dominion, and I think that I know why. Anyway, all that is left in the Empire is the military, and they are running everything now. I'm no longer an officer, nor am I exactly in good enough standing to re-enlist, and so I don't have the chance to rise through its ranks. But you do. As Miraj said, I want you to become my double agent. I want no, I need you to rise through the ranks of the Navy and depose that fucking golden-haired git. Once you are the Grand Admiral, you will control the Empire, because there is no way the party is getting back into power so long as Emrys is in charge, even if we do survive it all. Erich was entirely astonished by the way this conversation had headed. He had so many questions, but could not think just which one to ask first. Upon seeing that Erich was being hesitant, a sly smile formed on Butcher's heavily scarred face as he asked the immediate question on his mind. The sock of this content and OVL/N. Time is up, kid. So, which side are you on? Chapter 49 Joining Splinter. Erich remained completely and utterly silent for some time, as he weighed the options on his mind. How could he possibly answer such an important question on such short notice? After all, this decision would impact the rest of his life, no matter how short that may be. Whose side was he on? On the one hand was an interstellar empire, the place he was born in and was raised to be loyal to. The other was a criminal syndicate with revolutionary goals. Goals, which if they came to fruition, would have a serious impact on his life, and at first glance, they seemed quite appealing. Splinter was founded by mutants like himself, as a means to provide for themselves in an empire which did not give the slightest damn about their well-being. It was not just a brutal crime syndicate, no, Splinter was transforming into something far more chaotic and destructive. Splinter was becoming a political movement, one which Erich severely doubted would be against using violence as a means to achieve their political aims. Erich was one of these people, like Butcher and Mirage. He was a mutant, someone who had been discriminated against since the day he was born, and one who had been abused by even the government itself. If one were to ask him whether he truly felt like giving his life in service to an empire that did not give the slightest shit about him, then the answer was no. In fact, he had been looking for a way to escape the upcoming catastrophe for some time now. However, it was not like Splinter was much better. Their primary means of income were a combination of drug trafficking, gun running, extortion, and racketeering. They also appeared to have engaged in sex trafficking to some small degree. That was a practice that Erich found to be utterly repulsive. Because of this, Erich had a hard time convincing himself to join their side. After all, he would be aligning himself with some of the worst people in the Empire had to offer. But was that a fault of their own? Or had they been forced to such desperate measures by a cruel and tyrannical government which opposed all living beings who did not fit into their vision of the perfect race? Read Latson chapters at bin.com only. If Erich could choose to decline both offers, he would do so in a heartbeat. But if he did tell Butcher to go pound sand, then his corpse would probably be found in a dumpster on another world by Sunrise. After all, Mirage had told him he was now on Splinter's network, which meant they could determine if the death he suffered was permanent. But if he chose to accept Butcher's offer, he would be committing an act of espionage against the Germanic Star-Empire, which was a crime that would guarantee the next 250 years of his life were spent enslaved in a panel battalion. There he would spend the rest of his miserable existence fighting against the Empire's many enemies, with nothing but a flak vest and an assault rifle. Ultimately, what it came down to was whether or not Erich was truly aggrieved enough by the Empire to act against them. And the fact of the matter was, at this very moment, Erich held a significant hatred for his own people, especially after he was forced to abandon the woman he had grown to love. Perhaps it was the alcohol in his system which stirred his blood so violently. But Erich's hands began to shake as he thought about what he had done to Eselith, and in the end, he took another sip of the ice-cold lager before expressing a sentiment which would normally earn him a 10-year stint in a panel battalion. Fuck the Empire. Fuck Emrys. And fuck those cowardly politicians who have abandoned us all. If we do end up surviving Terminus, then I will be damned if I go back to being a good little soldier for a civilization which hates me. Alright, I'm in. I'll do what you have asked. And after I have deposed that cunt and installed my new regime, I will make sure people like us never have to live as the scum of society ever again. After hearing this, Butcher smiled and patted Erich on the back. He was clearly happy that the kid had made the right choice, which he was quick to express in the next moment. You made the right choice, kid. Hey, bartender, another round of drinks over here. Immediately after saying this, the bartender appeared with several more lighters of beer, which he handed off to Mirage, Erich, and Butcher, all of whom clanked their glasses together while Butcher made a toast to the future of the Empire. After saying this, Butcher downed the contents of the mug quicker than Mirage could manage. Meanwhile Erich was slurping on his beer to the best of his ability, but no matter how thirsty he may be, he would never be able to match their pace. Erich, Mirage, and Butcher continued to drink and talk of their plans for several hours, until finally, they were kicked out of the bar due to the curfew. If they did not vacate the premises soon, then without a doubt, the planet's security forces would bust down the door and haul their asses to jail. Thus, Butcher was the first to head off as he eyed Mirage with a look of approval. Just when Erich was about to leave Mirage alone, the woman pushed him into the wall and began to kiss him in a fiery display of passion. In between her kisses, she said something which Erich found to be incredibly enticing, perhaps because he was so heavily intoxicated. "Forget about all your worries and focus on me. Because tonight I'm going to be your little succubus." Dash. Erich awoke the next day, inside a penthouse suite which overlooked the entire city. He did not know where he was, nor did he entirely recall what everything he had done the night before. That is, until he pulled the covers off of his chiseled body, which revealed Mirage's beautiful face resting on his pectoral muscles as if they were a pillow. The woman slowly opened her drowsy eyes and yawned before she glanced over at Erich with a seductive smile. "Damn, that was so good last night that I must admit I am incredibly tempted to take you for another ride right now. Unfortunately, I'm pretty sure Emery's is having you watched by somebody. So, you're going to have to leave and treat this like a one-night stand. You would be surprised how common those are among mutants. As for what we discussed last night, you don't need to do anything major or take any risks. Just continue about your military career the way you have been doing things so far, and stick close to the Grand Admiral. No matter what he wants you to do, you do it with no questions asked. You got that?" Erich simply nodded his head in silence. He was naturally aware of his responsibilities, but after everything that had happened to him, he felt like he had just gotten off the world's largest roller coaster. First, he was forced to break up with Eselit, and then he found himself acting as a spy on the Empire's behalf, only to accept a job as Splinter's double agent, before somehow ending up sleeping with Mirage. Just what the hell was he doing with his life, that it had ended up in such a pitiful state? Naturally, Erich did not voice any of these thoughts out loud, and instead climbed out of bed and got himself dressed in his clothes. Where he immediately headed out the door, but not before Mirage gave him one last gift. The cobalt-haired beauty grabbed Erich's waist from behind and kissed him once more, before telling him some good news. "You are still looking for a place to crash, right? When you're off duty, I mean. Well, I've got plenty of spare room, so feel free to come back here at night when you need some R&R. Just make sure to lose your tail when you do so, all right? I'll be waiting for you." After saying this, she booted the man out the door, where he simply stared out of the windows and onto the massive industrial city which dwelled below with a lonely look in his eyes. So much had happened since he first left his home in Alemania, and things just seemed to keep getting worse. Erich began to wonder how much longer he had to live, considering the fact that he was now working for two opposing sides, both of which had the ability to permanently terminate his existence. Chapter 50 Sweet Retribution. Several months passed since Erich first joined Splinter, and during this time he did not hear much from his contacts in the criminal underworld. Every now and then he would be forced to perform some menial job, and then report it to the IIS, to ensure that the Grand Admiral did not suspect that he had switched sides. But aside from that, the rest of his leave was spent either in Mirage's bedroom, or completely alone. However, while Erich's life had returned to a state of normality, Eselith's father was still being held for interrogation. In a far corner of the Germanic Star-Empire, there lay a small facility, constructed on a rather large moon which surrounded a certain gas giant. At first glance, there was not anything remotely interesting on this moon. It had no valuable resources contained within it, nor an atmosphere which was capable of being terraformed. Instead, it was a barren rock. Or so one would think. However, deep beneath the surface of this moon lied a large facility, one where the Empire kept many of its extraterrestrial prisoners. Normally, the Germanic Star-Empire would have no business with aliens outside their borders, but there were a few who managed to cause trouble in their sector of space, or very well near it, and because of this, the authorities had built a prison to contain these wildly different species. Deep within this facility was a solitary cell, where Esverin lay confined to a table. For months now, after subjecting his daughter to some rather vicious forms of torture, in an attempt to learn just which Germanic male she had disgraced her bloodline for, the man found himself in the hands of Germanic custody, where he received far more brutal treatment than he had given his own daughter. The sad truth of the matter is, Esverin was subjected to the worst kinds of torture imaginable, everything from dedicated neurotoxins which lit his nerves ablaze, to more primitive methods of interrogation such as flaying the flesh from his body. If there was a way to inflict physical and mental anguish on this man, the Empire's interrogators had conducted it. Time and time again, Esverin would hope for death, and just when the Reaper was about to claim his soul once and for all, he was brought back from the brink of death by the Empire's advanced medical technology, where he was fully restored and then tortured once more. Despite the unspeakable treatment which he had received during this time, Esverin had not broken. Until now, that is. His mind simply could no longer bear the torment which he received, and finally he revealed that which the Empire wanted to know. It was the Gimderi Trade Union. Specficially, the Golden Tooth Cartel. They supplied us with the weapons and knowledge to rebel against the Empire. Pixel Goldentooth has a particular hatred towards your race and is trying to use us to weaken your military strength. He says if that were to happen, you won't be able to survive that which is to come. However, it is not just the Dvrakia resistance, he is brewing animosity between several subgalactic powers with the intent of stirring them into an armed conflict against the Empire. We were supposed to work in coordination with these foreign powers when they finally declared war on you. That is it. It is all I know, I swear. So please, kill me. This news had stunned the interrogators who had overseen Esvarin's torture, to the point where they did not know how to respond to this information. Instead, they quickly contacted their superiors, who relayed this information to their own bosses, until finally it reached the Grand Admiral's desk. Immediately, Emery sought to verify the claims that Esvarin had made, and thus he continued the man's interrogation until he could finally confirm whether or not his words were true. And after 2 weeks of solid sleuthing, the spies within the Imperial Intelligence Services were indeed able to do just that. What this revealed was a conspiracy by a particularly powerful interstellar civilization. One who was on par with the 4 major galactic powers. The fact that the Ghimderi had begun to target the Empire was no doubt a result of their refusal to join the interstellar banking system, which the Germanic people have long since, and rightfully believed, was a means for foreigners to gain power over their systems. The fact of the matter was that the Ghimderi trade union was now acting against the Germanic Star-Empire from behind the scenes, and not only were they supplying separatist movements across the Empire's recently conquered space, but they were antagonizing several subgalactic powers in an attempt to force a conflict to occur. This was effectively a declaration of war, and if the Germanic Star-Empire did not have other, more dire concerns that were immediately in front of them, then emeries would be tempted to respond to these provocations with coordinated terrorist strikes on Ghimderi banks across the galaxy. Unfortunately for him, Terminus was months away from reaching the Empire's borders, and because of this, emeries needed to shelve this idea for a later time. Thus, after discovering this news, his first response was to contact the Empress of the Alfheim Dominion and alert her to this discovery. Lunaria was, as always, excited to see the rugged and handsome Germanic male's holographic projection. And just when he was about to speak, she confronted him with the words he was not expecting to hear come from her luscious lips. "This is about the Ghimderi trade union, isn't it? What, are you perhaps shocked to see that I am already aware of your situation? You can relax and focus on more important matters. As we speak, I am maintaining the situation. Those pathetic dregs who clap and bark for those filthy goblins like trained seals will not be a problem that you have to take on by yourself. In fact, I have already sent my delegation to their actual masters, informing them that I will be taking military actions against their vassals if they do not intervene and halt this nonsense. And while those filthy dark-skinned freaks spat in the face of our threat, both the Asura Cabal and the Ennead Theocracy have agreed to calm their hounds and prevent them from attacking your empire. As for that fat sack of pus, Bixel, I have already arranged a little gift for him. One which I am sure he and the entire galaxy will enjoy to their heart's content. After all, it is only fair that after sending his agents to kill my own flesh and blood I have a little fun at the expense of his own bloodline. His chapter is updati by N.V.E.L. Pine.com. So, I assure you that he will be more than busy putting out the fire which I have started over these next few months. I suggest you make use of this time that I have given you to prepare your forces, because the Narku are very near. In fact, I suspect Terminus will be within your newly acquired borders in the next few months. You must be aware by now, Admiral, that if you take this path, entire worlds will die. Even if your species does somehow manage to survive this ordeal, the destruction wrought upon your civilization will have long-lasting consequences." Grand Admiral Emeries nodded his head in agreement with the Alfheim Empress's words before responding to them with a fierce look in his blue eyes. "We are well aware of the projected losses, but the Germanic people remain resolved to fight to the very last man, if need be. We will either survive this ordeal, or die in such a way that the galaxy remembers our people until the very heat death of the universe. I thank you for dealing with those pesky greenskin freaks, and I promise that so long as the Germanic Star-Empire lives on, we will one day repay this debt." After saying this, Emeries hung up on the Alfheim Empress, who then shifted her gaze onto the little gift which she had prepared for Pixel Goldentooth and the galaxy as a whole. However, contrary to what one might expect from the situation, it was not Pixel that Lunaria had targeted for vengeance, at least not directly, but rather one of his daughters. Thus at the moment, in this elven throne room, there was a female Ghimderi, who, unlike the male members of her species, was not exactly what one would call hideous or grotesque. In fact, her features were quite cute and attractive to any near-human species. However, she was bound and gagged while wearing a blindfold. Tears streamed down the young Ghimderi woman's eyes as she feared what was about to happen to her. After Pixel had targeted Celestia with his assassins, Lunaria had returned the favor and kidnapped the scheming Ran's daughter. The Alfheim Empress intended to film a particular lewd scene, one where the young goblin woman would be ganged up on by the political leaders of the Germanic Star-Empire, who were naturally wearing masks to conceal their identities. As repayment for the debt which they owed the Alfheim Empress, these men would break the taboo of their race and have their way with this Kinderi woman on film. This film would be sent across the galaxy as retribution for the Golden Tooth Cartel's schemes against the Asterian dynasty. Thus, Empress Lunaria Asterian wore a sadistic grin on her otherwise pretty face as she sealed this Kinderi woman's fate. Let the show begin.